Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps a lot, and it keeps these long stories going. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it right now where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? And if these stories help you sleep, feel free to tap the thanks button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. All right, let's get into it. I drove out to Henderson County just past midnight, fog dragging along the ground like a wounded animal. My name is Deputy Martin Caldwell, and I still hear the echo of that call. Possible missing hiker on County Road 132 near mile marker 23. The moment those words crackled through my radio, I felt that familiar knot in my gut. I'd been on the force for 15 years, 4 of them here in rural eastern Tennessee, and nothing shakes you more than the realization someone wandered into the wilderness and never came back. I flicked on my headlights and steered my cruiser down the narrow 2-lane road. Dead quiet except for the hiss of tires on damp pavement and the distant drip of water hitting leaves. The dashboard clock glowed 0014, and I knew backup wouldn't arrive for at least half an hour, so it was on me to get out there quickly. I parked on the gravel shoulder under a fading sign that read, "Welcome to Hawk Pine," the letters chipped, the paint peeling. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, stepped onto loose gravel that crunched under my boots, and paused to let my eyes adjust. The sky was a vault of black, stars swallowed by fog too thick to see more than 30 feet ahead. I cursed under my breath, because in these Appalachian ridges, the fog makes everything look the same. Every tree becomes a sentinel. Every shadow could hide someone injured or worse. I hit the switch on my radio. Dispatch, Caldwell on scene. I'm heading on foot toward mile marker 23. No sign of vehicle or subject yet. Crackle of static, and then, "Copy, Caldwell. We have the husband's last known coordinates. ETA for search team is 15 minutes. Over." The reassurance was thin. 15 minutes means an eternity when someone's out there alone in the woods. The path cut through knee-high ferns and bramble, slanted uphill toward a ridge where, according to dispatch, Claire Peters had set out hours earlier. She was a 29-year-old teacher from Nashville. Adventurous, they said, but maybe a step too confident hiking alone. Her husband called in around 11 p.m. when she didn't return. He was frantic, typical Tennessee drawl shaking with panic. "She's been gone since 5 o'clock, ma'am. I searched the campsite, but she's nowhere." I'm scared something happened. I'd responded to that panic before. I knew his fear was infectious, that knot in my stomach tightening as I stepped deeper into the underbrush. My flashlight cut a narrow beam over gnarled roots and wet leaves. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I kept my free hand on my taser, though out here it felt useless. A last-ditch option at best. Every 10 yards I flicked on my flashlight strobe to give a wider sweep, but mostly I relied on the steady circle of light. Voice in my earpiece crackled. "Caldwell, be advised. Last sighting was near a narrow creek crossing. Terrain gets steep beyond that." "Over," I replied. "Copy." Advancing to creek. My boots slipped on roots slick with moss as I climbed. The forest was alive with quiet sounds, occasional rustle of small animals, distant screech of an owl. No human voice. That silence weighed heavier than any noise. After 10 minutes of climbing, I reached the creek. It was a shallow ribbon of water winding through rocks slick with algae. Moonlight shimmered on its surface, but the fog blurred everything beyond a few feet. I scanned the bank. There, footprints in the soft mud, a woman's running shoes, mud-caked and damp. I knelt and examined them, The prints trailed off uphill into denser forest. No splashes, no sign of struggle. I radioed, "Found footprints by creek. Heading uphill, prints lead northbound." There was no reply, just static. I gripped my flashlight tighter and followed the prints. Each step sank slightly into mud. At the next bend, I saw her discarded water bottle, crushed like its last occupant gave up. My pulse pounded in my ears. I swallowed hard and kept moving. The incline steepened. Fallen logs crisscrossed, forcing me to climb over and under. The fog thickened, hugging the ground, swallowing the beam of my flashlight. A chill skated across my neck. I reminded myself to breathe, to think like I'd been trained. Step by step, quadrant by quadrant, methodically. But with each passing moment, the oppressive hush gnawed at my nerves. I could almost sense her out there, shivering, injured, possibly calling my name. I hollered softly, "Claire!" "This is Deputy Caldwell. If you can hear me, please make some noise." My voice sounded small, swallowed by the darkness. No reply, only the creek's muted gurgle and the wind sighing through branches. A sudden crack echoed behind me, like a broken branch underfoot. I spun, flashlight slicing through fog. Nothing but trees. I exhaled, slow and steady. "Stay sharp, Caldwell," I muttered. The prints led me deeper until I came upon her backpack, black, half open, contents spilled, granola bars scattered among damp leaves, a flashlight battery pack. I crouched, heart in my throat, checked the pack for ID. A folded map labeled Hawk Pine Hiking Trail, coordinates written in her handwriting. Nothing else. I clicked the pack closed and slung it over my shoulder. If she left everything here, maybe she tried to get help but turned back. I swept the beam uphill and glimpsed a slender shape nearly swallowed by fog, a red rain jacket draped over a fallen tree. My breath hitched. I approached with caution, radio keyed. "Dog team can't get this far in." I'm on my own now. No response. I moved to the tree. The jacket hung limp, the hood turned inward. I hesitated, stomach twisting, then flicked the beam inside. Dark hair matted with pine needles lay across the bark, and under it, Claire's face. Eyes closed, pale, breathing shallow. Relief and dread slammed into me together. I knelt beside her. "Claire, can you hear me? Deputy Caldwell. I need to get you out of here." She stirred, eyelids fluttering, voice raspy. "Sam, help." My name on her lips sounded like a plea, and I forced calm. I checked her pulse. Rapid, but steady, no obvious injuries. Her leg was twisted under her, shoe stuck in a tangle of roots. She winced, pain rippling through her face. I knew I had to act fast. The fog meant no helicopter, and the terrain was too steep for a gurney. Using my flashlight and a length of rope from my gear, I fashioned a makeshift harness. I helped her free the trapped foot, stifling her cries as blood seeped from a shallow gash on her shin. I tore a strip of my uniform shirt to stanch bleeding. She closed her eyes, clutching the shirt strip, whimpering softly. "Hang on, Claire, I'm getting you out." I lifted her arms around my neck as best I could and braced her weight. Each step downhill was a careful test of footing. My heart hammered, muscles burning. Every so often I glanced forward, no sign of deer or other hikers. Only the fog and the weight of responsibility. When we stumbled into the clearing near the creek, I spotted the front end of a Jeep flashlight beam bobbing in the distance. That was Deputy Ortega with the dog team, I figured. Relief uncoiled in my chest. "Clary," I called, voice hoarse. He jogged over. I set her down gently and relayed what happened. Claire's breath hitched, but she managed a weak nod. Ortega slipped off his pack and produced a thermal blanket. "We got you, ma'am. You're safe now." I exhaled, muscles trembling, as they secured Claire onto a makeshift litter. I stayed back, scanning the tree line, half expecting something else to emerge. But nothing came. The night felt too quiet now. My radio crackled, the low hum of urgent voices. Caldwell, bring the subject to staging area. Medevac ETA is 10 minutes. Over. I leaned against a tree, letting sweat cool on my skin. Adrenaline receding, I felt every ache. Shoulders throbbing from lifting her. Ankles screaming with each misstep. But Claire was alive. I watched as Ortega's team carried her toward the staging area. I turned back into the woods, scanning that silent expanse once more. The fog had shifted, revealing footprints leading to a narrow ravine. My gut twisted. Why did her prints vanish near the old fire pit? Why was she unconscious, not crushed or torn, just left there? I moved to the stream where I'd retrieved her pack. My flashlight's beam caught on a flash of metal, about 10 feet from the creek's edge, half buried under leaves. I knelt and cleared debris. A small pocket knife, a distinctive carved handle, something she had shown me when she left, said it was a gift from her grandmother. I felt my breath catch, realizing she'd either dropped it heading uphill or something happened after. I radioed Ortega. Found her knife. It's the one she always carried. No signs of wildlife attack, no broken branches beyond footprints. Static, then. Copy. We'll send a unit to collect evidence. Return to station when you can. I finally let myself slump to the ground, exhausted, watching Claire's breaths form in the cold air as she was loaded into an ambulance. I cleaned mud off the knife with my gloved hand, carefully placed it in an evidence bag. My muscles burned from fatigue and my mind buzzed. Something about that scene didn't sit right. No broken twigs, no signs of panic beyond her stumble. It was too orderly for an accident. Regardless, I'd get her home safe. I buttoned my jacket against the damp chill and hopped up, trudging back up to the cruiser. The road glistened under thin layers of mist. I started the engine and radioed, "Ortega, I'm heading back to station. We need a full search of that ravine. I'll file my report en route. Over." The reply crackled. "Copy, Caldwell. We're on it. Over." I drove through empty roads that snaked through farmland, the county lights reflecting on wet pavement. My head was a fog of questions. When I reached the station, my partner, Deputy Harper, was waiting with 2 cups of black coffee. She handed me one without a word, and I drank deep, the bitterness scouring my senses. She just nodded toward the map board, which already had pins marking clusters of search zones. Claire's home was on the edges of those zones, half hidden by ridges. Harper's eyes were tight, concerned. "You okay?" she asked. My jaw clenched. "She's alive," I said. "But I swear she didn't slip accidentally." Something was off, Lee. She watched me, understanding. I dumped the rest of my coffee and grabbed more supplies, rope, another flashlight, extra batteries. "I'm heading back out," I said. "I need to comb that ravine again. There's something there." She nodded, loading gear into my cruiser. "You're not crazy. I saw where she was found. Something was wrong. Be careful." I touched her shoulder briefly. "Thanks. I'll radio every 5." I climbed in and pulled out of the lot, sirens off, lights dimmed. The night stretched before me. The woods loomed like silent witnesses to something I didn't yet understand. I crossed into the search perimeter again, headlights slicing through fog. The ravine was darker now, shadows deeper. I parked 30 yards from where I'd found Claire's knife. The engine's hum died, leaving only my breath and the soft creek gurgle. I tried to recall every detail: fallen leaves, angle of footprints, the stillness of her presence. It felt too clean, like someone staged it. I grabbed my flashlight and edged toward the bank, scanning for disturbances. The knife lay in an evidence marker bag at the base of an oak, glowing pale against debris. I stopped there for a moment, staring down at it. Wind billowed through the branches, creating a low moan that sounded almost human. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter as I dropped the knife into a rock crevice. I moved deeper into the ravine, following footprints I'd taken note of earlier. Issues of spacing that suggested she was staggering, stumbling, not running or crawling. Maybe disoriented. I crouched to examine an imprint where the sole was partially missing. Debris embedded in mud. It matched her hiking boots. Nearby, I noticed a smear of blood. Thin, dark, half washed by damp soil but enough to darken the moss. I snapped a quick photo on my phone, labeling it for evidence. I pressed on until the ground leveled out near a rocky shelf. There, I found more droplets, leading to a large boulder nestled against the cliff wall. I flicked on my strobe light and shone it along the wall. The rock face had vertical scratches, shallow but deliberate, like someone had tried to grip and climb, but no handprint smears or deeper gouges. It was almost baffling. Why climb here? Why not stay by the creek? I stepped forward to get closer when a cold breeze stirred, carrying a soft breath of exhaled air. My flashlight caught movement, a flash of red fabric behind a thicket of branches. I froze. My heart rattled, mind screaming to lure out whatever or whoever it was. Yet, when I turned fully, only mist curled through trees. The jacket was gone. I said into my radio, voice low, "Henderson Dispatch, this is Caldwell. Possible lead, red jacket glimpsed near boulder in ravine. No sign of subject. Advise K9, unit on standby, over." Silence. Then, "Copy. ETA K9 is 10 minutes, over." I moved around the boulder's perimeter, gun hand hovering near grip, more for comfort than expectation. Runners' footprints led uphill into denser forest. I followed, slipping on damp moss, breath thick. Each step felt heavier, like the woods themselves resisted my progress. I continued until the forest opened into a hidden clearing I hadn't seen before, like someone carved it out. In the center lay a circle of broken branches, small twigs arranged in a rough spiral. It looked as if someone sat here, perhaps kept vigil or waited. I dropped to one knee, shining light across the ground. In the dirt, faint blood spatter. Tiny droplets sprayed as if from a cut or gash. I counted 6 distinct spots, leading northward deeper. No obvious weapon, no sign of struggle beyond the scratches on the rock. My stomach clenched. I radioed again. "Dispatch, I need backup. Possible crime scene. Coordinates coming. Over." My pulse pounded, each breath ragged. I pulled out my notepad, scribbled quick observations, then carefully stepped north along a narrow animal trail. The moonlight faintly illuminated twisted roots. The trail turned sharply east, hugging the cliff face. I glimpsed another smear of blood on a low-hanging branch, dark against pale bark. I pressed a hand to it, sticky and cold. I needed gloves. I cursed under my breath and dug them from my pocket before pressing on. The trail dipped into a shallow draw where water pooled in a hollow. I crouched, shining light into the pool. The reflection rippled in the beam. At the edge, I saw a tangle of hair. My breath froze. I stooped, grains of mud raining into the hollow. The hair was dark, wet and matted, coated with mud. I gently parted strands, revealing Claire's face half submerged, her eyes closed, pale lips parted. A pain lanced through me. She was breathing, faintly. I knelt, scrambled to unsling her pack, wet, heavy, emptied first aid kit, offered her water. Her eyelids fluttered. She rasped, "Sam." I reached down to lift her head, but something snagged my boot. A rope looped around my ankle, tied off to a protruding root. I froze. My flashlight beam caught the rope's frayed fibers, old, dusty. My mind screamed that someone set this. I yanked my foot free, heart leaping. I knelt beside her, checking vitals. She was alive, but hypothermic. Her clothing was soaked through. I grabbed her jacket, cutting a strip to wrap her head. She murmured incoherently, pain twisting her features. Something was off, scratches on her arms, thin, superficial, not enough to be self-inflicted. More like she hauled herself through brambles. I bolstered her head on a pack strap and whispered, "Hang tight, Claire. We're going to get you out." I checked my pocket watch, 2:17 a.m. K9 unit should be close. But something told me I wasn't alone. The clearing was sealed by tall pines, trunks like silent watchers. My beam caught movement at the edge, a flash of eyes, complete stillness. I snapped the beam in that direction. Nothing. Still, I felt watched. I hollered, voice echoing, "If there's someone out here hurting her, you best show yourself." My words sounded hollow, swallowed by trees that offered no reply. I hefted Claire, alert for any trap. The ground here was muddy, slick. Every step required a careful balance of weight. I tried to concentrate on the path, but the weight of her unconscious body burned my arms. My flashlight's batteries flickered. I snapped in fresh ones, the beam cutting through fog again. I heard a distant whine, dog yelp, then bark. The K9 team. Relief crashed through me and I headed uphill, stumbling over roots, branches scraping my arms. Up and up until I cleared the draw. The staging area lights came into view, blue and red flares marking where Ortega and 2 other deputies waited. The K9 handler, Detective Rossi, was kneeling beside his German shepherd, Zeus. The dog's hackles raised as I approached, sniffing the air. I laid Claire down gently, and Rossi grabbed medkit and blanket. I relayed information. Blood smears, weird rope trap, that spiral of sticks. Rossi took in notes, eyes fixed on me. "You sure no one else is around?" he asked. I shook my head. Felt like someone, like they wanted me to find her here. It's too calculated for random misstep. Ortega looked to the woods, radio in hand. "We'll sweep the perimeter. Caldwell, head back once they have her." I nodded, exhaustion seeping in. I watched as they wrapped Claire in a thermal blanket and placed her in the back of an ambulance. I climbed into my cruiser and inhaled, shaking. I drove back to the station, headlights illuminating the road that vanished into black on either side. Sirens faint behind me until they vanished. My radio crackled with status updates. Claire stable, en route to trauma center. Commander Davis instructed me to write a preliminary statement. I pulled into station lot and stepped into fluorescent light. The warmth hit me like a wave. I saw Harper and Ortega waiting. They asked quietly, concern etched into their faces. I just shook my head, silent. In the locker room, I peeled off mud-caked uniform, rinsed my boots. I washed blood from my hands in the sink, staring into the mirror. My reflection looked older, lines deeper, eyes hollow. I could still smell damp earth. I changed into a spare shirt and pocketed my wallet and keys. I needed to talk to someone higher up, maybe the county sheriff. Something wasn't right. I grabbed my notepad and headed toward the squad room. Inside, the fluorescent hum made me flinch. I found Lieutenant Rivers leaning over maps spread across a table. He looked up, exhaustion in his gaze. "Caldwell," he said. "We have Claire at Wake Forest Baptist. She's stable. Trauma unit will monitor overnight." Relief coiled in my chest. "Good," I replied. But there were footprints beyond the ransacked creek. I found more blood near a spiral of sticks. Also a rope trap around a root, tied old and dusty. Rivers frowned, rubbing his jaw. Spiral? Ropes? That suggests someone was out there, monitoring her. Someone wanted her, not just lost. I pulled up boots and coat by the door, voice low. Exactly. I found her near a boulder in the ravine. No witnesses, no cameras, but I saw a flash of red fabric. There's someone watching these woods, maybe someone who lures hikers. He nodded, glancing at Ortega and Harper, who stood behind me. We'll assign a task force. You get some rest. We're meeting at 7 a.m. to review evidence. I straightened. I need to go back out. There might be more clues. He paused, weighing. You did enough tonight. We're sending a patrol detail at first light. You stay fresh. I nodded reluctantly. I left the station, dawn still hours away. The lot was empty except for patrol cars. I pressed my palm to my badge, feeling its cold weight. I drove home, the coffee shop sign near the highway just flickering on. My apartment was quiet. I made instant coffee and sat at the table, notepad open. I wrote down every detail, her footprints, blood smears, strange spiral. I reread my own words, felt the adrenaline settle, leaving nerves raw. I tossed the notepad aside and stared at the ceiling until bleary hours slid by. By 0600, sun still low, I forced myself to shower, dress, and head back for that 0700 briefing. I glanced at my reflection again, hair disheveled, eyes shadowed. I exhaled, determined. Something ugly lurked in those woods. At 7 a.m., the briefing room was packed with deputies, detectives, and forensics techs. Maps littered the walls, pins marking where Claire's items were found. Lieutenant Rivers took the lead. We have two main areas. Mile marker 23 Creek and the ravine clearing. Blood samples have been sent to the lab. Claire's boots were too muddied for immediate prints, but we have photos. Task force will split. Caldwell, Ortega, Harper, and Detective Rossi will resweep the ravine. Tech team will check orbital helicopter for thermal scans. My stomach churned, but I nodded. We reviewed satellite images on a screen. Dense canopy, pockets of wetlands. No trails visible beyond the main path. Rivers pointed to a narrow ridge. We believe whoever did this used old logging roads. They knew the area. We need to close those access points. I thumbed my notepad, noticing scribbles. Spiral of sticks survivors? A detail no one in the room had mentioned. I cleared my throat. Sir, what about that spiral? I found it near the boulder. Seemed ritualistic. Rivers's eyes narrowed. Spiral? We didn't hear about that until your statement. Flores noted. Could be marking territory or leaving a message. Either way, keep eyes peeled. The meeting adjourned, and we geared up for the morning search. The ravine team drove to the pullout. Sun still rising behind smoky haze. Backpack stuffed with supplies, I stepped onto loose gravel and scanned the tree line. Ortega unleashed Zeus, who sniffed ahead. I retraced the path we took, finding the same rocky shelf. I crouched, shining beam across ground. Bones of leaves, dried blood. I traced trail north, same route. The spiral was gone. Someone cleared it. My pulse spiked. Ortega whispered, "They know we're here." I nodded and lifted Claire's hiking boots from my bag, swapped them for mine, leaving mine by the shelf as bait. The logic, if Predator came back, they think hikers still wore boots and might come for them. But my dread was that the Predator knew tactics. I ambled deeper into draw, voice low. Rossi, scan perimeter for prints. He knelt, brushing mud from boot imprint. These look fresh, different tread, men's size 10. I cursed. Reset dogs, we're going deeper. Branches clawed at my uniform as I climbed incline. At the boulder, I checked scratches again. More defined now, fresh gouges amid old ones. I snapped pictures. Sunlight filtered through emerging leaves, revealing a slight path leading east. We followed it, hearts pounding. The path ended at an overhang, a shallow cave in the cliff face. Inside, half-burned logs and charred stones. I stepped cautiously. Bones of small animals lay near embers. On a flat rock, I noticed Claire's water bottle, dented slightly. I picked it up, crushed lid, still faint odor. My pulse jacked. Someone returned here, maybe to warm themselves. I pressed deeper, flashlight beam lighting graffiti etched into rock. Stay lost. Ripped pieces of red fabric littered the floor. Claire's jacket torn to shreds. A crude carving of a figure, face crucified by scratches, stood on the wall. My stomach roiled. I radioed, voice tight. Ravine cave looks used recently. Fire pit, writing on the wall, need hazmat for biosamples. Fernandez from tech team replied, "On it, Caldwell." Over. I shone beam at far corner. Something moved, a subtle shift, like breath against a shadow. I jerked, flashlight beam sweeping. No one in sight. Yet smell of decay lingered. I swallowed hard and moved out, crossing back to the trail. Zeus's bark echoed ahead. He'd found something. Blackened cloth near cave entrance. I walked over and saw a hand-carved stick. Pointed tip, about 12 inches, stained dark. I snapped picture, bagged it. I felt eyes on me. My radio crackled. "Caldwell, we're sending chopper to scan for thermal signatures on Upper Ridge. ETA 5 minutes. I exhaled. Acknowledged. I stepped down the embankment, nearly tripping. The ground collapsed slightly, revealing fresh earth. Footprints. Barefoot, small feet. I turned dirt gently. Imprint of toes, a tiny sole. My throat tightened. That didn't fit Claire, adult woman, size 7 hiking boots. It hinted at an accomplice or something worse. A child? I bent down, camera ready. Ortega approached, silent. I showed him the print. His eyes widened. "We need to get this to forensics." I pocketed the data card. "Yes, let's move." We emerged onto a fallen log overlooking the main trail. K-9 team had set triage stations. The scene looked surreal. Deputies combing brush, drone buzzing overhead. I saw Rivers waving me. I jogged over. He pointed to a thermal scan image on a tablet. Blobs of heat moving near the upper tree line. Supports my theory. There's likely more than one person out here. My heart pounded. "We need to circle that area. Send team while we head deeper." He nodded. I relieved Ortega and we advanced. The air grew colder, shadows longer. Every step felt like crossing deeper into enemy territory. The underbrush rattled. I stopped, heart hammering. Footsteps didn't match my own. I spun flashlight to catch movement. A figure darted across 10 yards ahead. I yelled, "Freeze!" No response. Shadow melted into trees. The beam found only empty space. I pressed a finger on radio. "Dispatch, unknown subject 10 yards north, possibly armed, send additional units." Static crackle. I moved forward, gun raised but ready. Each broken twig sounded like alarm. I found red fibers snagged on a low branch again, just enough to be seen. But no jacket, just threads. I cursed, dug deeper into shoulder for extra magazine. A sudden whine pierced the air. Zeus's bark, frantic. I raced toward him. He stood at edge of ravine, hackles raised. He sniffed low, teeth bared as he stared at something. I waved Ortega. He arrived, gun drawn. Zeus snarled, stepping toward the edge. I shone light down. There, partially submerged in shallow water, lay a woman's hand. Fingers splayed, skin pale, fingernails chipped. I swallowed bile. I dropped to one knee for a closer look. The hand was Claire's, no doubt. Her jacket button clamped to wrist. Blood pooled in shallow puddle. I radioed in a voice that sounded far away. "We found her. Fatal wound to torso. Send coroner. We have a homicide. Silence. Ominous silence. I rose, scanning the ravine walls. The figure who fled must have dumped her here. I clenched my jaw. This is now a homicide investigation. Move out. Keep perimeter secure. Do not touch anything else. I stared at Claire's hand, sliding out of water. I couldn't look away as the current tugged her jacket, half draped across rocks. I ripped off my jacket, waded in, and pulled her body fully out. Her face was pale, eyes closed as if asleep. She had no defensive wounds. It looked surgical, knife to gut, almost precise. My stomach rolled. I stumbled back, knelt in mud, pressing coat to her chest to slow blood. I felt bile rise, but I forced it down, swallowing back on tears. My radio crackled. "Caldwell, do you copy?" I slapped it. "Copy." My voice raw. "She's gone. We have probable suspects still in woods. I want perimeter locked, drone sweep enhanced." Lieutenant Rivers approached, grave. "I'm sorry, Martin." I nodded numbly, hating those words. He laid a hand on my shoulder. "We'll find whoever did this." I closed my eyes, memories flooding. Her small frame crumpled, the water swirling around her. I breathed in cold air, stomach tight with guilt. Dare we call it guilt? I was supposed to protect her, and I failed. Dawn was breaking when we escorted Claire's body out. The ravine glistened with dew, birds starting to chirp, oblivious to the gore. I stood on the bank, watching paramedics lift her onto a stretcher. Rift in my chest twisted. I'd known people died in the wild, but never like this. Purposefully, patiently. My eyes flicked to the upper ridge. No sign of movement, but I knew we'd find them. I turned to Ortega. "Secure scene until forensics arrives, then we expand search 2 clicks north." He nodded, flashlight still trained on water. I knelt, straightened Claire's hand. Tears stung my eyes. I whispered, "I'm sorry, Claire." The wind carried those words away. There would be no justice for her tonight. Only this hollow ache. We transported Claire's body to the coroner's van and loaded it with reverence. I shut the doors. My reflection cracked in window glass. Eyes hollow, uniform stained with mud and blood. I leaned against the van, listening to engines idling, commands echoing across radio. It felt surreal, like I'd fallen asleep at home, woken up in a nightmare. Lieutenant Rivers approached. "We have a search warrant for nearby cabins. Reports of someone matching suspect description seen at an abandoned hunting camp 5 miles north." He handed me a flyer. Sketch of a man, lean, mid-30s, haunted eyes, wearing a dark hoodie. "We need you on that raid, Martin." I nodded grimly. "On it," he added. "Be careful. He's armed, considered dangerous, likely skittish. We need him alive for questioning." I exhaled, steeled myself. "Understood." We piled into 4 SUVs, off-road tires crunching on gravel as we headed north. The cabins were dilapidated. Boarded windows, sagging roofs, weeds choking entrances. I loaded my shotgun, checking each shell. The others checked sidearms, rifles. We moved silently, flashlight beams crisscrossing the ground. The first cabin had no movement, no signs of fresh footprints. The second cabin winced under the weight of moss. Ortega pried open a window with a crowbar. Inside was stale air, abandoned chairs, half-empty whiskey bottle on table. But no suspect. The wood floor was coated in dust. No fresh prints. I flicked on a headlamp and scanned walls. Faded graffiti. "Don't trust the forest." My chest tightened. We moved on to the third cabin at treeline. I felt a tremor of dread, this one smaller, more secluded. We encircled it, guns ready. Ortega signaled me toward a back window. I peered inside. Damp floorboards, tarp-covered cot, empty food jars stacked in corner. A ragged blanket lay across the cot, soaked with old blood. I felt bile rise. I tapped the window, signaling entry. Harper fired a flashbang through front door. It exploded inside with deafening bang and green smoke. My ears rang, fogging vision for a second. I ducked in through the back, shotgun at ready. Green haze hugged floor. I called out, "Henderson County Sheriff's Office. Come out with hands visible." Silence. The shotgun barrel caught on a jagged plank, and I stumbled forward into a spoiled mattress. Rotting wood creaked beneath me. A moan rasped from corner. I lunged toward it, stumbling through haze. There, huddled between cot and wall, was a man. Thin, gaunt, used-tooth grin plastered to his face. Eyes wild, pupils dilated, hoodie damp from dew. He reached toward me with trembling hand. I leveled my shotgun. "Don't move." He froze, sweat dripping from brow. I barked, "Get on your knees." "Hands behind your head." He obeyed, face contorted in fear. I stepped closer. The stench of decay was overwhelming. His clothes stained with blood, face flecked with dried mud. I knew I recognized him. That was the man who looked at me from collared photos. My heart hammered. "You're Samuel Hayes?" He's supposed to be Jeremy, but switch. The updated suspect's name was Samuel Hayes. He croaked, "I'm sorry." I kicked his shoulder, roughly enough to make him wince. "Why did you do it? Where's Claire?" He gasped, tears mixing with sweat. "I didn't mean, just wanted her to stay lost. I heard a voice." My trigger finger itched, but I forced myself to bladder down. "Voice? Who told you to do it?" He stared at me, delirious. "The forest keeps them," whispers. I grabbed him by hoodie and yanked him up. "What does that even mean? Where's the rest of the spiral things, the traps?" He shook head violently. "I'm sorry, please." I kicked him again. "Answer." He cowered, hugging himself. "There's something out there. Something hunts her." I yanked him toward the doorway, shotgun muzzle pressing into his back. "Get moving, now. Or that." We shackled him hands behind his back, led him outside at gunpoint. Dawn light pressed against the forest, revealing silhouettes of deputies sweeping brush. I pushed Hayes onto the ground, knee into his shoulder. "Talk," he moaned. I just heard the whisper. Saw the spiral. I saw her on the ridge, so alone. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "You set the trap for hikers? You left her to die in the ravine?" He whimpered. "I thought she'd get lost." "Not dead. It's not my fault." I pulled him to his feet. "You'll tell me everything." He glanced at the trees, eyes wild. "There's something there. It lives under rocks. It takes people who wander." I slapped him, hearing the crack echo in dawn. "Stop this," I yelled. "This forest isn't haunted. You're the killer." He spat. "No, you don't understand." I tried to help them find peace. I felt bile rise again, his mind fractured by delusion. I pressed him into SUV as forensics snapped photos. I slammed door shut. He pounded fists against steel, screaming scripture about nature and judgment. I stepped back, shotgun across forearms, voice cold. "Shut up before I break your jaw." He went silent, trembling. At the station, we locked him in booking. He wailed, "They come for me next. They know I saw them." I clenched fists at my sides, refusing to feed his madness. I watched him through glass, pale, gaunt, whispering prayers under his breath. I turned away and walked back to my cruiser. The ravine scene still haunted me. I climbed in, closed eyes tight. Hours ago, Claire lay lifeless by that water. Now, Hayes sat next cell, drugged on his own terror. But what of this voice he heard? I shook head, driving toward the coroner's office where Claire's autopsy results awaited. The sky was pale gray, clouds rolling in. My radio squawked. Caldwell. Lab confirms Claire died from a precise stab wound to liver. No other internal injuries. Time of death estimated between 2:10 and 2:20 a.m. My stomach twisted. That matches when Hayes was still at the cave? I asked. The voice crackled in static. Yes. His prints found on knife handle. Blood on boots matches victim. I exhaled slowly. Understood. I shut off radio. I stared at curved road, tree line blurred by mist. Hayes was guilty, but something still didn't fit. The spiral of sticks, his muttering of voices, the rope trap. I shook it off. My mind's tired, I muttered to empty car. I watched tree branches sway, shadows in already greening leaves. I started engine, heading home for a few hours of fitful sleep before debrief. Sleep was fleeting. Nightmares laced with Claire's face half submerged in water. I bolted upright at 5 a.m., drenched in sweat. I showered and rolled into station by 6 a.m. Lieutenant Rivers pinned me with tired eyes. We have a press conference at 0800. Hayes' confession released. We'll call this closed. I licked dry lips. We can't call it closed, I said quietly. There are unresolved questions, spiral, traps, his ramblings about voices. Rivers sighed, rubbing temples. I get it, but we need to move forward. Hayes will be charged. Our job's done here. I clenched my jaw. I'll monitor him, but I want permission to visit crime scene again tomorrow, alone. He hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but get a partner. Don't go out after dark again. I nodded curtly and headed to conference room. By 8 a.m., news vans lined the station's front lot. Cameras, microphones, lights. Sheriff Caldwell, no relation, stepped to podium. Flashbulbs popped as he announced, "We have apprehended the suspect responsible for the tragic homicide of Claire Peters. Evidence conclusively links Samuel Hayes to the crime. He is currently held without bail. We offer deepest condolences to the family. This case is closed, except for final legal proceedings. Thank you." Reporters shouted questions, but he departed. I slipped out back, avoiding the chaos. I needed coffee, clarity, and the quiet of that ravine before it vanished under media buzz. I drove to 7-Eleven, grabbed black coffee, burning warmth down my throat, then headed out. The sun was high. Fog lifted. I parked at the ravine entrance and stepped onto ground still damp with dew. I flipped on a GoPro to record impressions. The spiral was gone. No trace. Hayes' cabin had been bulldozed yesterday. I wondered if anyone replaced those sticks. I ventured deeper, scanning banks. The creek glinted in sunlight, water running over smooth stones. The forest felt different in daylight, alive, innocuous. I knelt at creek's edge, water whispering over ankles. I cupped cold water, splashed my face, and stared at the spot where Claire's hand lay. My reflection fractured in ripples. I traced old footprints, now faded into nothing. No blood smears, no sign of where she fought. I straightened, walked uphill to the shelf where her pack was found. It had been removed, a pin marked on map as evidence point. I flicked GoPro off. This was too clean. Law enforcement collected everything. Nothing left behind. But I remembered the handprint on rock, grip marks across boulder. I traced fingers with fingertips. The rock was weathered but smooth. I studied it, then felt something under my foot. A small metal cap, bottle cap, tarnished, with a faded Forest Ranger logo. I slipped it into evidence bag clipped to my belt. It was older, likely from years ago. Why lie here? I held it to sunlight. The logo was from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. A few counties west, miles from here. Was Hayes a park denizen or just scavenging? I slid it into my pocket, head spinning. I climbed further, following whispers of what might be a deer trail. I reached a fallen log about 20 feet from the boulder. Under it, I saw something wrapped in plastic. Cautiously, I pulled it out. A faded journal, lined pages torn from a notebook, bark fibers stuck to its cover. I turned pages, saw entries in cramped handwriting, mentions of, they call it, the hungry ones, trail lures the weak, and older dates over 5 years back. Some entries described finding spiral formations of sticks, strange markings on trees. Could Hayes have found this, been influenced? I rifled through pages. One entry read, I hear them calling at night. Voices by creek, manes of red. They want me to feed them. I felt my blood run cold. These weren't protective words. They were recruiting. Someone else wrote this. Could be. Former victim, someone lost. I scanned for name, only initials, J.H., circa 2018. Hayes. He'd been here before. A cycle, not a first-time crime. I snapped photos of pages, bagged journal. My instincts screamed this was no random homicide, something older, deeper. I heard barking behind me. Zeus, on leash with Ortega. I signaled them over. Ortega examined the journal, brow furrowed. He's been planning this for years, I said. He nodded, eyes grim. Training twisted him. I exhaled. We need to search those logging roads east, find where he started, and check missing persons report from 2018. We scanned the trees until we found fresh cut marks on saplings, man-made brushings marking a path. I traced the crooks in maps on my phone. They led toward a slope not in county records. I radioed Rivers. We have evidence Hayes wasn't acting alone. He found this path years ago. Send teams to locate entrance. While we waited, I sat by creek, journal opened. I read, tonight I will bring them someone fresh. They choose at random. Tonight they called for a woman in red. My chest tightened. That was Claire. That explained the spiral. There was ritual. Something in that journal wanted to perpetuate harvest. I snapped journal shut. He was a vessel, not the source. Ortega placed hand on my shoulder. Now we dig deeper. I nodded, fear coiling tight. Later that afternoon, we staked out the logging road entrance. Sheriff's unit, Border Patrol liaison, and state game warden gathered. Ranger Jacobs from GSM National Park joined. I introduced myself and handed him journal pages. He read silently, eyes widening. This describes tribes of hungry spirits said to inhabit rock fissures. Local legend, never believed. But that swing of sticks, that ritual would guard their den. Fear rose in my gut. So Hayes worshipped this? Jacobs nodded. Either that, or he's been driven mad by isolation. But there's something in those mountains. Folks who vanish say they hear voices calling their names. I swallowed hard. We have to find that den? He motioned to slope. It's here. The fissure opens near that ridge. We find it. We might find more victims, or stop anyone else he planned to sacrifice. I shivered, remembering Claire's eyes underwater. Let's move. We formed a line, weapons low but ready, flashlights at hand. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no rustle. Sun dipped behind ridges. I stepped forward, chest tight, walking into the mouth of the abyss. We descended into a valley carved by centuries of water, walls of rock rising on either side. The journal described markings, ancient grooves on stone walls. I shone my flashlight at a large rock face. There, scars etched into granite, half eroded but still visible, curved lines forming a spiral, faint as bone beneath moss. I traced a symbol with gloved finger. Goosebumps prickled my skin. Jacobs whispered, the entrance should be just beyond. We moved as a single unit, boots crunching. The gorge narrowed until only 5 of us could stand abreast. The air grew colder. Breath puffed in our lights. I felt a weight in my chest, like the darkness had mass. I pointed to a small opening at ground level, half hidden by ferns. No taller than 2 feet, but jagged edges. Jacobs knelt, brushing leaves aside. "This is it." He pressed hand into moss, smudging a faint red powder, clay mixed with iron oxide. "Blood?" he said. My breath caught. I shined my light inside. The cavern extended into blackness, narrow, maybe 20 feet before widening into a larger chamber. I swallowed, steeling myself. "I'll go first." I stepped in, crawled forward until light from outside vanished. The chamber opened, ceiling low. My flashlight flickered as I scanned floor. Bones, small bones. Rodent, raccoon, and further in, human remains. A leg bone cracked cleanly, with a faint dagger cut. My vision blurred. I knelt, heart hammering, and took pictures. The odor was musty, metallic. I wiped sweat from brow and continued deeper to a shallow depression where ashes lay. Burned fabric threads stuck to charcoal, red fibers, Claire's jacket remnants. I exhaled, ragged. Someone came here after burning. I rose, shone beam at walls. Symbols matching spiral outside were carved here, deeper. The spiral seemed ritualistic, a binding circle. I noticed small niches in the walls, carved hollows each holding a stone. I pried one free, smooth, black, almost warm. My eyes stung as I realized they held grease. Animal fat. I looked around, 3 more stones missing. "They took offerings," I whispered. Footsteps behind me. Harper and Ortega. They scanned cave as if expecting movement. "We should call for forensics," Harper said. I shook head. "No, we need suspect alive to tell us where next offerings were taken." He mentioned more victims from past. Ortega shone beam to the right, found a narrow crawl space. I squeezed through, heart slamming. It opened into a domed room. Floor flat, walls damp. In the center sat a rough stone altar, bloodstains crusted. Surrounding it, small items, an old locket, tarnished spoon handle, torn scrap of journal, entries I hadn't seen before. "Tonight, we bring the red one. We give tonight to them." I reached for scrap, and a sudden tremor echoed through cavern. Something moved above us. I raised shotgun, heart racing. My light flicked upward to a slanted crevice overhead. In darkness, something slid. Shadow shifted. I whispered, "Move back." But before anyone could react, a low hum filled the chamber, a single note rising, vibrating through bones. It sounded like whispering voices, chanting in a language I couldn't identify. I looked at Harper. She paled. Ortega scanned frantically. Jacobs muttered, "I've never heard this in any legend." The hum grew loud, resonating off walls. My ears rang. I craned neck, shining light into shadows. I saw grotesque shapes, wooden idols carved into twisted, elongated faces, each mouth open in silent scream. Each idol perched on a small ledge above eye level, 4 in total, facing center. Their eyes glinted in torchlight, painted red as if alive. I staggered back. "We need out, now!" But the hum intensified, shaking stones underfoot. I stumbled, gun arm clattering. Light from beam jittered and went out, plunging us into darkness. Heart hammered, mind buzzing. I fumbled for extra batteries, hand trembling. The hum deepened, vibrating through chest. I heard scuttling, something moving behind idols. I reignited light and aimed upward. I saw them, pale, gaunt figures hunched behind stone ledges. 4 of them, packed in shadows. Eyes glowing a faint yellow, faces twisted beyond human. Their limbs were contorted, skin grayish but warm. They hissed, inhuman, something like clipped laughter. I swallowed bile. They dropped from ledges, landing on all fours. My torch beam caught glimpses of sinewy frames, elongated fingers brushing stone. I yelped, "Ortega, Harper, fall back!" They obeyed, racing back to entrance. I fired shotgun at nearest figure. Pellets slammed into flesh, but it barely flinched, advancing with jerking gait. I stumbled back as bullet casings clinked on rock. It lunged, and I backed into altar, wrenching off a stone idol. I swung at it, striking its face with metal clatter. It hissed, recoiled. I yanked a flask of lighter fluid from pack, found in gear by mistake earlier, and tossed it toward idols on ledge. The fluid splashed onto them and floor. I flicked my lighter, torching fluid in swirling vortex. Flames roared, licking idols and casting monstrous shadows on walls. Figures hissed, writhing under flame light. One screeched, truly inhuman scream, before collapsing into ash and bone fragments. Others leapt away, screeching, dissolving into black smoke. I kept flames high, chanting through fear. Finally, silence fell. Smoke filled chamber, stinging eyes. I coughed, dropped lighter. The idols lay half-melted, glowing in embers. I picked up the journal scrap that said, "Summon them in flesh." My hands shook. I sank to knees, chest heaving. I looked at the 4 niches, idol spots blackened. The cave felt empty, but I feared more could emerge. I scooped Claire's locket from altar, her treasured necklace, made of silver with engraved initials. I sank to knees, holding it close. Tears burned my eyes. She'd been here, trapped by this ritual, sacrifice for something beyond mortal. I stood and motioned others forward. We backed out, leaving flames to consume idols. At entrance, dawn's gray light seeped in, illuminating dirt and leaves. I stumbled to outside world, lungs burning. I collapsed, hands bracing on ground. Behind me, cave glowed red, smoke drifting into trees. Ortiz and Harper joined, pale, shaken. Jacobs watched from ridge, tears in eyes. "They're gone, for now," he rasped. I nodded, voice raw. "We need to seal this, bury lids in concrete, mark as hazard." He agreed. I stared at cave. Fear and sorrow mingled. Claire never stood a chance. She was fuel for something ancient, inhuman. We returned to station silent, haunted. That night I wrote my report. Evidence of supernatural elements, police findings, everything. Lieutenant Rivers read, face grim. "You want to put this in official record? You know how that sounds." I looked him dead in eyes. "We saw them with our own eyes, cannot ignore." He exhaled. "We'll contain it, but keep it off public record for now." I nodded, bitterness in throat. I returned to my apartment, body exhausted, mind racing. I sat at table, holy water and journal scraps laid before me. I burned pages that referenced ritual, casting ashes outside. I whispered a prayer for Claire. No peace would come for me, no rest. Later, night fell. I returned to Ravine one last time, covering entrance with concrete and boulders. I placed an evidence marker at mouth. Closed. Hazard. In bold letters. I backed away, watching fog creep across rocks. Something moved behind me. Shadow fell. Across boulder. My pulse jumped. I spun, flashlight raised. Nothing but fog and trees. I exhaled, raising camera to record. I panned across scene, sealed cave, trees, swirling mist. My light caught a fresh set of footprints in mud, smaller than human, leading toward woods. I followed briefly, heart hammering. The prints vanished at tree line. I pressed camera's record button. Suspect presumed Eli. My voice quivered. I trailed off as I stared into darkness. A distant whisper drifted, my name. I froze, light trembling. Caldwell. It sounded like Claire, thin and far away. I swallowed hard, stomach churning. I hollered, "Stop!" "Who's there?" Only silence answered. I scanned tree line. Moonlight caught something. Long hair, red fabric fluttering. It vanished. I felt the forest shift, alive with quiet hunger. I backed away, heart racing, unable to tear eyes from shadowed woods. I whispered, "Not again." But deep down, I knew this was far from over. The forest had tasted blood. It whispered for more. I slung camera strap over shoulder and fled down the road, knowing the nightmare would return. I remember the first time I felt that hollow ache in my chest, like my ribs themselves were trying to collapse inward. It was a Tuesday, mid-November, and I'd just finished my third coffee of the shift. The sky had been gray all day, a dull, unending steel that lit up just enough to let you know the sun still existed somewhere behind it. I sat in my squad car, idling at the edge of Cedar Creek Road, waiting for a possible runaway report to come through. My name is Detective Marcus Holloway, and I've been with the state police for nearly 25 years. I've worked everything from juvenile thefts in Greenville to drug busts on the coastline, but nothing ever prepared me for the call I got that night. At 7:12 p.m., my radio crackled. "Unit 47, be advised, possible missing person, female, age 23, last seen leaving a friend's house around 6. Caller is a panicked mother. Name of missing female is Emily Carter. Address, last ping from a cell phone shows grid 42 by 67. Cedar Creek exit off Route 15. Caller states daughter left with a friend to go hiking along Cedar Woods Trail, was expected back by 7. Caller concerned because daughter's phone is dead. No traffic on phone since 5:45. Over." The voice on the radio was calm and procedural, but I could hear the tension drifting in, colors of fear lacing the words. I keyed the mic. "Copy that. Dispatch. 47 is en route to last ping location." I slammed the car door and shoved the collar of my uniform jacket up against the chill. The engine's hum faded as I sped onto Route 15 northbound, weaving around one slow-moving farm truck after another. The road curves gently in these parts. Rolling hills, emerald pines that crouch close to the asphalt, as though ready to pounce on any wandering traveler. It was the kind of place where people kept their doors locked at night, even if there hadn't been a missing person case in years. By the time I reached the Cedar Creek exit, dusk had fallen entirely. My headlights picked out a lone sign, Cedar Woods Trailhead, a simple wooden post with faded white paint. I flicked on my emergency lights for a second, just enough to catch the edge of the parking area. One rusted minivan parked crooked, engine off, windows tinted dark. No one inside. I checked my watch, 7:28 and dropping. That left me just under an hour before it got too dark to see more than 10 feet ahead. My flashlight sat on the passenger seat, but I grabbed it and flicked it on for good measure. When I stepped out, the air pressed against me like a damp blanket. Pine needles carpeted the ground, their needles dead and brittle. There was a faint moonlight glow that seeped through the overlook of trees, but it barely registered against the shadows. I approached the minivan slowly, scanning its windows. Wet leaves stuck to the windshield, but no smudged fingerprints or handprints. Just cold glass and the stale odor of upholstery left running too long in the heat of an August afternoon. I knocked on the side window, not so much expecting an answer, but to startle whoever might be inside. Nothing. I circled the van, looking for doors ajar, anything that might tell me more than just a kid screwing off. On the rear bumper, someone had taped a faded sticker, "Support our troops." Whoever owned this van probably left it there at least a year ago, judging by the grime. I radioed dispatch. 47 to dispatch. I've got a stationary vehicle at the trailhead. License plate NX09RA, registered to a rented unit out of Morrisville. No signs of disturbance. Vehicle appears locked. I'm going into the trail to investigate foot traffic. I paused, listening to the chirp of static that came back. Dispatch copy. Be advised, 47 is off the road, proceeding on foot into Cedar Woods. I stepped onto the trail. A narrow path of muddied earth, tightly bound by tree roots that twisted like fingers seeking purchase. My flashlight cut through the gloom in an elliptical cone, illuminating patches of brush and occasional footprints pressed into the soft ground. At first, it looked like a single set of footprints. Barely distinguishable between two pairs of footprints, though, one smaller, daintier, almost like a running stride. The other larger, dragging oddly, as though the person wore boots that were too loose. They zigzagged closer to the creek, but something didn't feel right. The dirt near the creek bank was churned up, as though the boots had slid, scraping the earth. I knelt to examine the prints, one step deeper than the other, like someone favoring a wounded leg. My pulse quickened. This wasn't a practiced hiker weaving through trees. This was panic. I radioed again. 47 to dispatch. I've located footprints heading north along the creek bank. One set looks like a woman's athletic shoe, the other a man's work boot. Feels recent, within 30 minutes or so. I'm following them up the bank. I tucked my knees and pulled myself up the slope, branches snagging at my jacket. The beam caught an elbow-deep gully where water still dribbled over moss-covered stones. The prints ended abruptly at its edge. No sign of a crossing, no makeshift log or stones placed to form a stepping path. The larger boot print seemed to dash off into overgrowth. I felt a twist of unease. If she'd attempted to cross, why leave no signs on the other side? Had the man left her there? Or worse, did she cross? But something happened on this side, something I was meant to never see. The hush of the forest felt alive, as though watching. I forced my breathing steady, reminding myself to trust the process. Scan, observe, think. I shone the flashlight across the creek, its water dark, muttering under a thick canopy. There, I saw it. A slumped shape beside a mossy rock. I moved closer, boots crunching pine needles. At first glance, it looked like a backpacker's dummy, abandoned. Then I realized the jacket was moving, chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. The face, or what I could make of it, was turned away from me. I clicked off the flashlight for a moment to let my eyes adjust. Nothing but blackness and the dull sound of running water. I flicked the light back on and approached. It was Emily Carter. Her hair muddied, plastered to her cheek. Her face streaked with tears that had frozen in the cold, little icicles clinging to her eyelashes. She lay on her side, knees drawn to her chest, trembling. She wore trail-running tights and a black hoodie zipped halfway. Her cell phone lay a few feet away, screen cracked, filming the pale moonlight. I knelt beside her, felt for a pulse, strong but rapid, like a hummingbird's wings. "Emily," I said, voice low. "I'm Detective Holloway, North Carolina State Police. You're safe now." Her blue eyes opened, vacant for a second. Then recognition flooded in. She tried to shift, and I saw shallow cuts on her arms, the color of fresh steel against her skin. "Don't move too much," I said. "Stay right here. I'm calling EMS." I fumbled my radio. 47 to dispatch. I found the missing subject, Emily Carter, conscious but injured. Shallow cuts to arms, hypothermic. "Please send EMS to Cedar Woods Trailhead ASAP." My radio crackled back. "Unit 47, copy that. EMS en route, ETA 5 minutes. I glanced at her backpack, zipped tight. I unzipped it carefully. Wallet, granola bars, a nearly empty water bottle, and a small flashlight that was still blinking. No sign of a larger knife or any other possessions. I felt a fresh twist of unease. No belongings to show a plan, no map, no extra jacket, just her phone's battery dead, and a single flashlight that somehow made it to this far-out point. Who was she with? Why were those boot prints, possibly a man's boot prints, beside her? And how did she end up unable to cross the creek? I turned back to her. "Hey, Em, can you tell me what happened? Do you remember hiking with someone?" She blinked, processing. She lifted her head slightly, speaking through chattering teeth. I came out with my boyfriend. His name is Steven. We planned this trip weeks ago. He said he had to show me this clearing with the big rock. But when we got here, he got a phone call. Said his family had an emergency. Something about his sister. He said he'd be right back, just needed to drive to get service. He left me at the water's edge, said, "Don't go anywhere." I waited. Then my phone died. Her lip trembled. I fell asleep, woke up freezing, tried to cross the creek to get help. But the current was stronger than I thought. I lost my footing and fell. I crawled back here, but I couldn't make it to the trail. She broke off, tears surging. I felt the weight in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "It's going to be okay," I said. "EMS is almost here. We'll warm you up, get you to a hospital." She nodded weakly, eyes distant, as though already somewhere else. I stood, shining my flashlight across the creek to where I'd seen the boots dash off. My gut told me whoever Steven was, he hadn't just gone to get cell service. He'd left her alone, and that thought embittered me. The whir of tires on gravel reached me, and I snapped my light back to Emily. I gave her a small nod. She clung to that, blinking rapidly. 2 EMTs, one male, one female, set up a portable heater and wrapped her in a thermal blanket. Their eyes flicked to me as they worked. "Keith and Melissa on scene," the male EMT said. "Hypothermia, minor lacerations. Transport in 10, I stepped aside. Detective Holloway, thank you." Melissa gave me a quick nod. Keith scanned the creek bank. "You found her here?" "No sign of anyone else." "Just boot prints leading deeper into the brush," I said. "I'm going to check it out once she's stabilized. I need to know what happened to her boyfriend, Steven." Melissa shook her head. "One thing at a time. Let's get her gone. Then you can track whoever left her." I nodded and watched them lift Emily onto a stretcher, load her into the back of their ambulance. The sirens shivered to life, cutting through the stillness. I felt hollow. Another coffee wouldn't fix this one. I turned back to the creek, the beam of my flashlight landing on the opposite bank. The earth was churned up, deeper than I'd thought. Boot prints formed jagged patterns leading north, then seemed to disappear under a tangle of fallen branches and saplings. I took a step closer, heart thumping. The wind rustled overhead, clearing a space for the moon to cast a pale gleam. I listened. Nothing but the creek's murmur, the rustling pines. The trail was slick with mud, and each step felt like sinking into uncertainty. I radioed dispatch one last time. 47 to dispatch. I'm going to follow suspect prints upstream. Keep Cedar Woods secure. I'm stepping off grid for a bit. The static hummed as I climbed the bank. At the top, the trees grew denser, branches like hooked claws reaching for me. Each step I took, I reminded myself. Stay vigilant, trust your training, watch for tripwires, watch for footprints. I could feel the darkness leaning in, and the smell of wet bark filled my lungs. My flashlight's beam wavered as the branches brushed my shoulder. I pressed forward, following the prints. knowing I was now chasing shadows in cedar and oak. And somewhere ahead, Stephen, if that was his real name, watched and waited. Maybe he thought I wouldn't find him. Maybe he thought what he did would be hidden by the pines forever. I kept to the faint prints, the ones that cut a jagged line through fallen leaves. They led me through a final stand of trees where the moonlight spilled over a small clearing. I shone my light across the ground to find scraps of fabric, ripped from a black sweatshirt, caught on brambles. My pulse quickened. I felt like I'd walked into the final act of a play I didn't understand. A hiker's trail dipped here, splitting left to a ridge and right to a hollow. The footprints took the hollow route, disappearing into a gnarled throat of pines where moonlight couldn't reach. I swallowed, keeping my finger on the trigger guard. Each step felt heavy, like carrying an ocean in my chest. I stepped off the clearing into the encroaching blackness. The trees closed in, branches overhead forming an arch that swallowed the sky. My boots crunched fallen cones and dried leaves. I thought about Emily, alone and hypothermic, trusting me to find answers. I thought about that minivan, about how easy it was for a person to vanish in these parts. And I thought about the family waiting for their daughter at home. How they'd blame me if I didn't find her boyfriend and learn what happened. I followed the prints, running my light over mossy trunks and jagged bark until I saw them again. Deeper, more haphazard, as though the person had stumbled or tried to flee in panic. My blood sang with tension. The forest felt alive, something rustling beyond the flashlight's reach, a low breath that didn't belong to me. I stopped, held my breath, eyes scanning. There was a fallen log a few feet ahead, my light slicing through the darkness. On the log, I saw a smear of dark liquid, fresh, and a single blood-stained handprint. That handprint was neither Emily's nor mine. It was larger, calloused, like someone who did hard labor. I pressed my fingertips to the bark, feeling the warm tackiness of it. My gut churned. Then I heard it, a soft crack, like something snapping behind me. I spun. Flashlight beam jagged across the forest floor, but saw nothing. Just the high-pitched whine of wind through needles. The creek's babble was still audible somewhere behind me, but it felt distant now, as if I'd crossed into another world where water was a memory. I took a single step forward and nearly tripped over a twisted root. I caught myself, steadied my breathing. "Stephen," I said, voice low as though speaking to someone standing, right behind me, though I knew he wasn't. He wasn't that careless. He'd drawn me here for a reason. Up ahead, the footprints led to a fallen sapling, 12 inches in diameter. The boot prints ended exactly where the sapling lay, as if someone had dragged a body over it. I knelt and brushed aside wet leaves, found more blood, nearly black as it soaked into the soil. I sucked in air, pushing panic down. I radioed in. 47 to dispatch, possible homicide, multiple blood smears, suspect prints. I need backup and crime scene unit to Cedar Woods Trail, second clearing north of initial location. Over. The voice on the radio responded within seconds, terse and professional. Copy, 47. Additional units are en route. ETA 5 minutes. 5 minutes felt like a lifetime. I stood, flashlight skimming the tree line. My breath fogged in the beam. Each tree loomed tall, a silent witness. I tightened my grip on my Glock, feeling the familiar weight soothe me. I stepped further into the pines, stepping carefully over exposed roots. The forest floor sloped gently into a narrow ravine, where the creek whispered beneath dark boulders. I could see footprints crossing the rocks, dragging traces of mud and blood. They continued on the far side, climbing a short, steep bank that led to another clearing. The moonlight here was dim, filtered through dense branches, but I could see something at the center of that clearing. A second fallen sapling with dark stains, and beyond it, nothing. Just more trees. I swept the flashlight and caught a flash of white, like cloth, tangled in branches. I forced myself forward, each step measured, till I reached that second sapling. The blood there was thicker, congealed into pools where the wood had split. It looked like someone had tried to break through, maybe a struggle. I crouched and found a scrap of fabric dangling from a bramble 50 feet ahead. My heart pounded as I lifted it. Torn, black cloth, part of a hoodie sleeve. I remembered Emily's hoodie, half-zipped. This was darker, heavier fabric, like a sweatshirt made for cold nights. Whoever wore it knew these woods. I slipped the scrap into an evidence bag and stood. My light caught movement. A breeze rocked a lower branch and revealed a narrow path descending into shadow. The footprints led there. I wiped my forehead, cold sweat tangling my uniform. I thought about calling it in forensics right then and there, but I had to see it. The next clue, the next trace. I stepped down into the ravine where shadows clung thick, branches overhead like skeletal fingers. My flashlight barely penetrated it. I followed the path a few yards until I came to a rock slab jutting out over the creek. It was slick with moss, and the water had lapped against its base. On top, I saw a pair of footprints, bare and pale, foot size that matched Emily's, pressed into damp moss. Next to them, the larger boot print was pressed deeper, as though someone had stabbed a boot into the moss, leaning hard. It didn't make sense. How could someone stand there without sliding? Unless this wasn't just ground, but part of a creature's den, something that moved between creek and forest, something strong enough to hold a grown man in place. The thought prickled my spine. I aimed my light up the bank and saw the path slump into darkness. It curved around a bend. I lifted my radio. 47 to dispatch. I'm requesting immediate backup to my location. Ravine just south of 2nd Clearing. Possible struggle site with additional evidence. Over. The response was near instant. 47 copy. Backup ETA 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I felt the blood in my veins slow, as though time had elongated. Here I was, alone in the woods, chasing something that could kill. I moved toward the bend, each step deliberate. The ground sloped steeply and I slid once, catching myself on a nearby root. My light flicked across a mossy log and a small twisted ankle of what looked like a human skeleton, bleached white. My chest constricted. I knelt, shining my light on the thigh bone. It was a deer's leg. False alarm. But the way the hoof lay half buried in mud felt too deliberate, too neatly placed. I shook my head, forcing down the tremor in my fingers. I could imagine someone leaving animal bones to mock me. I knew by now the outline of these woods. They were old, filled with stories of hunters and loggers who vanished. There were rumors of illegal meth labs, occult rituals by troubled souls. But none of that mattered. Right now, I had to keep my wits. The blood, the prints, the torn fabric, they all pointed to someone who intended to leave no trace. I took a deep breath and pressed on, up the bank. The undergrowth tore at my pants and I cursed softly. At the top, I found myself in a 3rd clearing, smaller, framed by stubby pines and a circle of stones that looked like an old fire pit. The moonlight achieved a pale glow here, enough to show footprints around the pit's edge. Bear prints this time, small and splayed. I followed those to a spot behind a boulder where a tattered backpack lay. Its zipper was half open. Inside, a blood-soaked bandage and a tin of mints. No identification, just these meager remains. My flashlight landed on a scrap of paper half protruding from the mince tin. I plucked it out. November, on Birinci. My heart dropped. Today was November 11th. That meant this time, 11 hours ago, someone had been here. Waiting, watching. Waiting for what? For Emily to show up? For me? I slipped the paper into evidence. My phone buzzed, 2 missed calls from the chief. I ignored them. I was on call, not on the clock anymore. I was knee-deep in these pines, chasing a ghost who might kill again. I needed to find out who Stephen really was, if that was even his name, and if he'd lured Emily here for fun or for something far darker. I scanned the clearing, saw deep claw marks carved into the boulder, fresh. They looked like someone, or something, had used nails to scratch there, as though writing a message or marking territory. I got down to inspect, wondering if I should even touch it, but I did. The hardness of the rock beneath my fingers felt real, alive, as though it pulsed. A snapping twig to my left. I bounced my light over, nothing but tall grass swaying. I clicked off the flashlight, muffling my breathing. I listened. The wind, the creek far below, and something else. A low, guttural humming. A human voice humming a lullaby, cracked and sad. It felt like it came from every direction at once. I felt my skin crawl. I reached for my radio. 47 to dispatch, The humming stopped. For a moment, only my heartbeat filled my ears. I swallowed hard, flinched. Then a soft, wet crunch, like someone coughing up mud, came from behind me. I spun, flashlight on, beam skittering across pine trunks. Up ahead, I saw a figure emerge from behind the largest pine. A man, half-shaded, ragged beard, eyes that gleamed silver in the light. His clothes were torn, streaked with dirt and dried blood. He looked gaunt, as though he hadn't eaten in days. His eyes widened when he saw me. Shock or fear, I couldn't tell. He opened his mouth to speak, but only yielded a low gurgle. His right hand clutched a hunting knife, the length of it smeared with dark material that glinted in the light. "Don't move," I said, hand on my holster. It felt heavy, absurdly heavy in my hand. He took a stumbling step back, eyes darting to the trees behind me, maybe looking for escape. Instead, his breath came shallow, loud, like he'd run for miles. I swallowed. "Who are you? What happened to Emily?" He jerked his head in a circle, looking at the bloody markings on the boulder, the torn backpack, the claw marks. Then his eyes met mine, haunted. He shook his head as though snapping out of a dream. "Not Emily," he rasped, voice low as gravel. "Not her." He shook and spat, red flecks hitting the ground. "She's gone." My heart flipped. "Please, call me Stephen. You know my name. You know who she is?" He laughed, a short, brittle sound that echoed off the trees. "I know what they want. You brought the light. You broke the pact." The words slashed at me. I frowned, trying to process. "Pact? What the hell are you talking about? Who is they?" He lurched forward, pressing the knife against his own throat, thumb on the blade's belly. My breath caught. It looked like he wanted to end it, right there, in this silent clearing. I raised my voice. "Drop it, put it down." He glared at me, eyes flicking to the boulder and beyond. "You can't save her now. She's theirs." He pulled the knife away from his neck and flicked it in my direction. Less a threat, more a declaration. "You think you can just come here and fix it? You broke the pact. Now we all die." I forced my breathing steady, reaching for my cuffs. Backup was minutes away, I reminded myself. "Listen to me, buddy. I just want to help. If you put that knife down, I'll call off this whole thing. We'll get you medical attention, warm you up, get you something to eat." He barked a laugh, sharp, resonant. His eyes gleamed in the flashlight's beam. Number, "They want the blood." The creek doesn't lie." He pointed to the creek's edge where the water ran red, like it had been dyed. But creeks don't hold color that long. I knelt to touch it. It slicked on my glove, dark, peppered with sand. It was blood. Emily's or his? I couldn't tell. The hum of approaching engines broke the moment. Lights bobbed through the trees, red and blue, illuminating the clearing in violent flashes. I stood, waving my arms. "Hold it right there. Police, don't move." The man dropped the knife and raised his hands. His trembling was violent. I moved in, holstering my own weapon, and handcuffed him as fast as I could. His gurgle turned into a sob, bitter, almost relieved. Backup joined me, 2 patrol cars, another state trooper, and the CSI van. The moment they arrived, I stepped back, watching as they swarmed clearing, snapping photos, dusting for prints, bagging the knife. I pulled the suspect up to his feet to read him his rights, but he mumbled incoherently, eyes locked on the creek. "She's theirs," he muttered, over and over like a prayer or a curse. I took one last look at the red-streaked water, at the claw marks on the boulder, at the empty circle of stones. The man, Stephen, as he said, slumped as troopers led him away. My radio buzzed with voices. Chief calling for an update, paramedics checking on me, forensics asking for details. I turned away, flashlight trembling in my hand. I felt as though I'd wandered into a nightmare, and I wasn't sure I'd ever wake up. When it was all over, when the ravine was cleared and the trees stood silent again, I walked back to my squad car. The air was colder, sharper, as though something had turned it brittle. I thought about Emily, somewhere now under blankets, being treated. I thought about Stephen, under arrest, in cuffs, babbling about pacts and blood. I thought about what happened here, how easily a person can slip between the world of daylight and something far darker. I got in the car and closed the door, watching the forest swallow the flashing lights. For a moment, I felt the ache return, deeper than before. I started the engine and drove off, the forest receding in my mirrors. But I could still feel it. Those eyes, that knife, the echo of a lullaby in the pines. And I knew that I'd never truly leave Cedar Woods Trail behind. The drive back to the station felt endless. The highway lights blurred past, and my vision kept drifting toward that dark tree line I'd just left behind. My knuckles ached from gripping the steering wheel. I realized I hadn't felt them until just now, pulse finally slowing enough to notice. I flicked on the radio, not the scanner, but the AM station that played classic rock. The singer's voice came through, raspy and distant, and I stared at the wavering signal bar. For a moment, the normalcy of a rock song jarring across the speakers should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel more alone, as though the world had moved on without acknowledging what I'd left in those woods. We brought Stephen, if that was his real name, into the interrogation room around 2:47 a.m. He sat slumped on the metal chair, wrists cuffed in front, head hanging. I noticed the bloodstains on his sleeves, the dried crust along his collarbone. The trooper who booked him told me he was mumbling about the pact and "they won't let me leave." I watched Stephen's chest rise and fall, his breathing shallow, like he expected someone to come for him at any moment. Even his eyes, when I looked at them, were glazed over with fatigue and something deeper, sheer terror, as though he were certain that at any second the door would burst open and something unspeakable would drag him away. I leaned in, turned on the overhead light. The harsh glare bounced off his forehead, making him squint. "Stephen," I said quietly, "I'm Detective Holloway. I need to know who they are. Why did you do this? You left Emily out there to freeze." He jerked his head back, staring at me, eyes wide. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he rasped. His lips moved so slowly I had to strain to catch the words. She wasn't supposed to be alone, not without the blood." My breath caught. "Blood? What blood? You left her with cuts, but they weren't lethal. I don't understand." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, then leaned forward. For a second, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity I'd never seen in a normal suspect. "You broke the circle," he said, voice ragged. "She was meant to bleed into the creek. It needed to flow red. It needed to bleed so the forest could wake." He spat on the floor. "She choked on moonlight. She wouldn't die right. Now the whole circle is unbalanced. You have to fix it, detective. You have to help us." I sat back. His words made no sense. "Circle?" I repeated. "Forest? Help you how? You're under arrest for attempted homicide, kidnapping. Why should I trust anything you say?" He laughed, but it sounded like a strangled animal. "What you must trust is the woods, the trees, Holloway. They don't care about charges. They only care about life and death. And if you don't set it right, the creek will run black, and the entire valley will bleed. You will bleed." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if what he said was real or the result of some psychosis. "Fine," I said. "Let's start with who else is involved. Who did you break the circle with?" He shook his head, leaning back as though letting the metal chair absorb his weight. His eyes slid shut. "I'm sorry. I can't." He began to mumble incoherently, words falling apart like rotted timbers. I sat there for 5 minutes, watching him slump into himself. When our lieutenant came in, coffee in hand, I realized I still had flashbacks of the creek's red hue. It simmered in my nightmares. The next morning, I tried to piece together what little we had. We knew Stephen had rented that van out of Morrisville. We searched the rental agreement. Driver's name: Stephen Patrick Dawson. Date of birth matching the suspects. Address given in Burlington. But when we checked that address, a decaying 2-story farmhouse sat vacant. Yellowed curtains danced behind grimy windows, but no one answered. A neighbor said she'd seen weird headlights near the place at odd hours, but she couldn't say who they belonged to. I drove out there around 9 a.m., knowing full well I'd dread what I might find. The farmhouse sat alone on a rise, willow trees drooping like skeletal arms. I approached cautiously, shotgun across the front seat for backup. The front door creaked when I pushed it. Inside, the air was stale, acrid like moldy fabric and something else, faint copper like blood. I swept my light over peeling wallpaper, boards that creaked underfoot, and then saw it. Dark streaks down the wall, smudged as though something had scraped across. I followed the smears to the basement door, a warped plank of wood hanging off one hinge. I radioed for a K9 unit, but the call came back delayed. "Unit 47, dispatch. K9 is tied up on 15E ETA 10 minutes. The word dogpile flashed in my mind. Too many cases, not enough resources. A familiar frustration. I nodded, tucked my pistol and flashlight at the ready, and descended into the darkness. The basement was dank. The beam of my flashlight picked up bottles of ammonia, rotting food in plastic bags, and what looked like fresh footprints in the dust. The footprints led to a crude wooden table where butcher's knives lay smeared with dark stains. On the table, an open spiral-bound notebook. Pages filled with scrawled symbols. Circles around stanzas of words I recognized but didn't want to think about. Blood of innocence. Restore the flow. Pact with the earth. My throat closed. I flipped pages, heart pounding, feeling as though I were trespassing in someone else's nightmare. The last page was torn, edges ragged, but I saw enough. Emily's name, a date, November 11th, and beneath it, a hastily drawn circle, its edges smeared in red. I felt bile rise. I tucked the notebook under my jacket and stood. The flashlight flickered as the hairs on my neck prickled. I spun. Something moved in the corner. A shape slumped against a wall, shoulders heaving. I eased closer. It was an old recliner, torn and stained, and someone was sitting there, a gaunt, pale man, hunched forward so fully that only a mop of unkempt hair was visible. I called out softly, "Police, if you're down here, I need you to move. I won't hurt you." The figure shifted, and I saw eyes, vivid blue, wild. He wore a blood-spattered lab coat. One sleeve was torn, revealing ramrod veins tracing toward pale, trembling hands. He seemed to dissolve in the shadows when I flicked my light again. Gone. My breath hitched. I backpedaled to the stairs, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. I didn't turn around until I reached the top, and by then the dank smell had followed me out, curling at the back of my throat. I closed the door, locked it, and radioed 47 to dispatch. Possible accomplice. Basement of Burlington farmhouse. Notebook with symbols recovered. Backup can enter in 5. My voice shook. Suspects still here, or someone was. I'm not waiting to find out again. Back at the station, Lieutenant Forbes said he'd assign a full team to the farmhouse. He tapped the notebook I'd handed him, his forehead creasing. Whatever this is, we need to coordinate with homicide and possibly a SWAT element. If there's another person out there with a murder kit, we can't waste time. I nodded, but my mind kept drifting to the symbols, the blood circle, like a scar on my brain. Later, I sat at my desk with a fresh pot of coffee, chewing the bitter edges. My phone buzzed, a text from the coroner. Preliminary report. Emily's cuts were inflicted post-mortem. Minor lacerations on arms, consistent with shallow slicing. But the bruise on her temple, possible blow with blunt instrument. She likely died before hypothermia set in. Need to confirm. Hypothermia? It felt like a lie. The cuts on her arms had been superficial, intended to bleed into the creek. But if she died first from a blow to the head, that meant everything Stephen said about her bleeding into the hymn of the woods was an orchestrated lie. He didn't just leave her, he planned her death. And worse, maybe. Maybe what he'd said about the forest wanting her blood wasn't delusion. It felt like some ancient madness, as though the trees themselves wanted sacrifice. That evening, I returned to Emily's parents' house. They'd been released from the hospital. Emily was stable but needed stitches and observation. Mrs. Carter answered the door, eyes swollen, but she forced a polite smile. I led them into the living room, walls lined with family photos, warm and overflowing, with laughter. It felt wrong to bring horror here. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I have clear information on what happened to Emily," I began. Their hands tightened on the arms of their chairs, knuckles white. The coroner confirmed her skull fracture occurred before she reached the creek. It wasn't an accident. Someone struck her, likely behind the head, then left her to bleed. Mrs. Carter gasped, body shaking. But who? Why? I met her gaze. "We have a suspect, her boyfriend, Stephen Dawson. He's in custody and is being uncooperative. He claims Emily was meant to bleed intentionally into a stream as part of some ritual. We found a notebook in his basement with references to a blood pact, symbols, drawings." Mr. Carter's face went pale. "Ritual?" he whispered. "That's insane." I swallowed. "I agree, sir. It sounds strange, but the evidence is there. The cuts on her arms were superficial. He slit her just enough to bleed, then hit her over the head, perhaps to knock her out, then let her go limp. She tried to crawl back but collapsed before she could cross the creek. Her body fell where I found her. Mrs. Carter's tears slipped free, a silent stream. She leapt from the sofa and swept me in a desperate hug. "Find him, make him pay." I let her hold me a moment, feeling her warmth. It anchored me. When she released me, I nodded. "I'll do everything I can." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch in the station's break room, bleary from 48 hours straight. My eyes kept drifting to photos of the logbook, the blood-smeared boulder, Emily's dazed face in the flashlight beam. I realized something I hadn't let myself admit. I felt complicit. If I'd ignored the notes about Pact and Circle, I might have found her sooner. If I'd noticed the bruise on her temple when I first saw her by the creek, I might have rushed for help faster. Now she was in a hospital bed, alive but broken, and someone else's daughter had died in that valley long ago, whose bones had been used as a taunt in the ravine. I closed my eyes and let the coffee crash my system into wakefulness. Tomorrow, I had to face that farmhouse again. I had to find Stephen's accomplice, or accomplices, and I had to stop whatever that pact was before it claimed another life. At dawn, Forbes and I led a team back to Burlington Farmhouse. We blocked off Route 49 with patrol cars, lights flashing to keep gawkers away. It felt like a war operation, crime scene tape like barbed wire, forensics vans humming generators. We suited up, Kevlar vests, long guns loaded, flashlights at the ready. My partner, Trooper Collins, checked his sidearm, lips pressed tight. Neither of us spoke as we approached the door. I knocked sharply. "Police, North Carolina State, open up!" No response. The front windows were blackened with grime. Then, with a nod from Forbes, Collins and I kicked the door in. It splintered, dust billowing inside. We swept the entryway, the hall carpet bare beneath the layers of dust. A stench like rotting meat made me gag. This was different than the mildewy basement. I held my breath, swept my light over the kitchen, copper-colored stains on the floor, dark blotches on the cabinets. My stomach turned. I forced my gaze upward. On the ceiling, a twisted noose hung from a joist, frayed rope swinging slowly. I looked at Forbes. He shook his head, silent confirmation. Something dangerous was escalating beyond what we could have predicted. We moved room to room, carefully. In each corner we found scraps, handwritten pages with scrawled diagrams, circles connecting names of local residents, symbols tied to phases of the moon, and annotations like Harvest, Red Harvest. The final bedroom held a gurney, cotton-stained deep crimson and rust. A metal basin on the floor had matted hair and dried blood around its rim. Collins retched. I forced my gaze down. Curled at the basin's edge, a small silver locket encrusted with mud. I pried it open, a photo of a little girl, blonde curls, bright green eyes, pressed against a faded spring meadow. I flashed on how Emily's parents had looked last night, shell-shocked but resolute. I closed the locket. The significance hit me. Someone had sacrificed a child here, not just Emily in the woods. That locket could only belong to a victim long before. The basement victim was not animal. It was human. A missing girl from years ago, her remains desecrated. I realized the ritual patterns weren't about Emily alone. They were about something bigger, centuries-old rites twisted into these woods. I felt rage and dread twined together. I stomped to the door. I radioed, 47 to dispatch, possible homicide site, Burlington Farmhouse. Victim discovered, presumed minor female. Need medical examiner now? We're shifting to homicide response. My voice was raw, trembling with suppressed urgency. Forbes moved through the house, snapping photos, directing forensics. Collins followed, clearing rooms. I felt like my skin had turned into a thin membrane, stretched over bone, transparent. The reality of what we'd found carved into me. Children sacrificed to feed some dark cycle rooted in these pines, and at the center of it was Stephen, or his predecessors, believing they could hold power over life and death by offering bodies to the earth. I took a breath, forcing calm, as if it were a resource I could ration. I led Collins to the back door, where we found footprints leading off into the woods. Familiar trail, heading north, retracing the path Emily and Stephen had taken. Then beyond it, deeper into uncharted growth. Up ahead, the spring that fed Carver Creek. Its water still murky with sediment, and what I feared was the memory of those dark rites. I knelt by the stream, cupped my hands, and splashed cold water on my face. It felt holy and profane at once. Above me, the dawn light glimmered through branches, making patterns on the water. I realized I was responsible for putting a stop to this, unweaving the curse that had suffocated those woods for who knows how long. The forest watched. I felt it breathe around me, expectant. I looked back toward the farmhouse, crime scene lights like dying fireflies, understanding that pulling these weeds of evil from the roots would take more than arresting Stephen. This place needed cleansing. The victims needed acknowledgement. The stories needed telling. I rose and brushed mud from my knees. I turned to Collins. "We follow these prints," I said, "and we don't stop until we find every trace of what's been done here." He nodded, face pale but resolute. Together, we stepped into the trees. The path was narrow, littered with pine needles and hidden holes. I followed the prints, flashlight carving arcs through gloom. Each step heightened the tension, the faint echo of footsteps behind us, the rustle of undergrowth. It felt like walking into a hungry mouth. Then we saw it, a clearing where the trees stood in a perfect circle around broken stones. In the center, charred embers still smoldered, the smell of burned wood and old iron thick in the air. And on the ground, the prints ended exactly at that circle. I knelt and ran my fingertip along a dark smear in the dirt, a symbol matching the one in Stephen's notebook. It was an inverted triangle inside a circle, etched into the ground as though scratched by fingernails. I felt bile rise in my throat. I radioed 47 to dispatch, found ritual site, smoldering embers and fresh etchings in the soil. Multiple bodies likely interred beneath. Request cadaver dogs, SWAT to secure perimeter. Proceed with caution. This may be the epicenter. My voice echoed oddly loud among trees, like a prayer or a challenge. Collins stood beside me, his light scanning the circle's edge. "Do you feel it?" he whispered. "That weight?" I nodded, swallowing hard. In that moment, the forest felt alive, a heartbeat beneath the soil, ready to swallow us whole. I realized just how deep this went, into the very roots of these woods. But I also knew there was no turning back. We had to press on, to uncover the remains, to stop the cycle, to free Emily's spirit and all the others who'd been lost. I straightened, dusted off my knees. The forest exhaled around me, a whisper of leaves. I felt the chill of destiny brush my skin. "Let's keep moving," I said. Collins nodded, steady. We headed into the circle's gloom, stepping over embers that hissed at the touch. The path beyond led deeper still. Where the trees leaned inward, the light faltered. I tightened my grip on my gun, each breath echoing in my ears. Past the embers, the shaking ground, I knew what awaited us. Truth so dark it might consume the rest of me. But I had a choice, to run or to keep going. and as long as Emily's mother waited for answers, I couldn't leave. So I took a step forward into the forest's hungry heart, and committed myself to whatever lay ahead, no matter how deep the darkness, no matter what it would cost me. I would see it through. I had to. Because out here, in these pines, the line between life and death was written in blood, and someone had to rewrite it. The forest closed around us like a living thing, limbs arching overhead to blot out even the moon's feeble glow. Every step brought a fresh chorus of snapping twigs and rustled leaves. I felt the pulse of the woods, the slow, steady thrum of branches swaying, an almost imperceptible murmur that felt like a heartbeat. My breath came in shallow bursts. I realized I was holding it. Collins was just a few paces ahead, his flashlight tracing wide arcs through the gloom, hunting for any sign of movement. Each time the beam caught a shadow, I felt my gut twist, expecting to see someone lurking there, a shape hunched and waiting. But the trees were still, silent except for the soft hiss of embers dying behind us and the distant steady flow of Carver Creek, its water slipping through the night like a half-forgotten secret. The ground sloped gently downward, the pine needles underfoot muffling our footsteps into near silence. The path narrowed until it was barely a single track, pressed into the earth by countless boots. The deeper we went, the more the trail seemed to writhe, as though alive. Roots rising up, coaxing us to stumble, thickets swaying to trip our ankles. We stayed side by side, careful not to stray. I thought of Emily's face again, the fright in her eyes, her lips chattering as she tried to explain what happened. My wife's face flickered in my mind, the way she looks when our daughter comes home from school, safe and scurrying to show her latest crayon drawing. I clenched my teeth, forcing the image away. This place was everything that good people fought to protect their families from. This dark, tangled wood, this hunger for blood. A few hundred yards in, Collins stopped short. "Detective, look." I lowered my flashlight. On the left side of the trail, pressed into the mossy carpet of pine needles, was another set of prints. Barefoot, tiny, like a child's. They were shallow, nearly white against the dark earth, frozen in place as though someone had tiptoed there. Next to them, the larger boot prints sliced through the undergrowth, deeper than before, as though someone had plunged a foot onto the ground with force. I looked up and down the path. No sign of the prints continuing further. They ended abruptly at a tangle of roots and fallen branches. In the dim light, I could make out a tiny shoelace, a frayed bit of pink, like what you'd find on a toddler's sneaker. My chest tightened. I knelt to inspect the lace, dropping to one knee, careful not to disturb the ground too much. The lace felt sticky. When I touched it, a faint scarlet smear coasted my gloved fingertips. I wiped it on my pant leg. Blood. Fresh. I looked at Collins. That's recent, maybe 2 hours old, tops. Kid's lace, probably from the missing girl Stephen mentioned. He swallowed, gaze flicking to the mass of brambles ahead. God, who would bring a child here? He wiped his forehead. I stood, wiping my gloves on my pants. This was their ritual site for sacrifices. We have to be careful. We don't know how many were brought in here. The hairs along my neck prickled. Let's keep moving, quietly. We pushed through the brambles, branches scraping against our uniforms. The air smelled heavy, damp earth, rotting wood, and something coppery, like blood pooled and left to sit. My flashlight uncovered more tiny traces. A bent metal hair clip, a small silver earring stud that glinted when the beam hit it. I dropped to my knees to pick up the earring carefully, slipping it into an evidence bag. I recognized the design, heart-shaped, pink enamel inside a twisted silver frame. It was a children's earring, the kind a mother would give her little girl. I felt a knot of nausea, a memory of turning my daughter's ears when she lost one of hers, and how she cried because she was sure it was gone forever. We took slow, precise steps, leaving no marks. Ahead, the trees cleared into yet another small glade with a single, gnarled oak standing at its center. The ground beneath it was packed dirt, bare of needles, as though someone had trampled it repeatedly. In that clearing, I saw an overturned, child-size wooden chair, its legs splintered, backrest snapped. Near it, a smoldering ember lay dead, the coals cold and ashen. I swallowed, light shaking as I scanned the circle around the oak. No footprints now, but deep gouges in the bark, like someone had carved into it with sharp nails. I stepped closer. The slash marks formed a shape, an uneven star inside a circle. It matched the symbol from Stephen's notebook. My stomach lurched as I realized this was no mere savage act of a lone madman. It was a pattern, repeated for years, etched into wood to bind something, a trap to hold souls. I crouched to look beneath the oak. Roughly 20 feet from where I stood, nestled in a shallow grave, I saw the tip of a shoe, a pink sneaker with a smiling cartoon character on the side. I swallowed around a lump in my throat. "Collins," I whispered. He shined his light, following my beam. His breathing caught. He pointed. "No fucking way." He knelt beside the grave entrance, brushing aside pine needles. The soil was loose, fresh. I reached forward, retrieving a small ceramic hair bow, pink, stained with dirt. I tucked it into another evidence bag. 3 missing children from the county in the past decade wore hair bows like this, I said, voice flat. Probably 15 now, 15 kids gone. I rose. My knees felt wobbly. I half expected to see that tattered recliner man, but no one stirred behind the trees. I felt the need to radio in, but I checked my watch, 3:57 a.m. If I called now, I'd lose the thread. I waited, scanning for movement. A sudden breeze lifted a handful of ash from the ember pit. It swirled, then settled, revealing a fresh shape. A small handprint, smudged but distinct, palm up. I pressed my gloved fingertip against it, still warm. The blood here was older, but that smear less than an hour. The sacrifice was recent, a child's blood offered to keep some ancient hunger sated. I shuddered. I thought of Emily, held in that ambulance, her eyes wide when I said her boyfriend had lied. I'd told her then it was over now, that he couldn't hurt anyone else. But here, at the heart of it, with the roots of so many lives tangled between the earth, I understood I couldn't stop it by merely arresting Stephen. The cycle was older, deeper than him, some force anchored in this hollow, feeding on innocence and fear. Just then, rustling to my left. I jerked, raising my flashlight. The beam caught something pale, a flash of reflection, then gone. I moved forward, flashlight sweeping tree trunks. I felt something brush my shoulder. I spun. Nothing. I exhaled slowly. Damn. My voice seemed loud. Collins stood behind me, eyes wide. He pointed to a figure emerging from behind the trees. A woman, clothes torn to tatters, face smeared with dirt and dried tears, eyes black voids. She moved slowly, steps uneven, as though each foot was nailed to the ground. Her hair was matted. Her lips trembled as she opened them to utter a soundless moan. I raised my flashlight, beam flickering over her. A shard of recognition pierced me. She wore a faded pink dress, decades out of fashion. A locket hung around her neck, a silver oval set with a scratched surface. I felt my pulse spike. "Sweet Jesus," I whispered. She hovered at the edge of the glade, sunken-eyed, staring at the oak as though expecting me to leave her alone. I felt a tug at my gut, that hollow ache again, as though a great weight settled on my shoulders. I'd seen missing persons, battered victims, but her, cold, hollow, neither alive nor fully dead, she was something else. A ghost returned to where she died. I took a step forward. The wind kicked up, swirling ash around her ankles. She looked at me, and for a moment I felt raw sorrow in her marbled eyes. She moved, head tilted, raising her hand slowly, then whispered something too quiet to catch. I leaned in. "What's your name?" My voice was a croak. The locket's surface glinted in the starlight. I realized the date on the locket, July 19th, 2005. I gasped. That was the date little Maggie Turner went missing. We'd searched this exact area back then. We'd found no trace, just rumors. This could be Maggie. My radio crackled, jarring me back. I answered, 47 here. The voice said, "Detective Holloway, major crimes. We're on scene with SWAT, cordon secure, K9 units arriving. ETA 2 minutes, TBD en route." I said, "Copy that. Found potential victim remains and current evidence of sacrifice. Give me 10 minutes." I turned to the apparition. She watched with those hollow eyes. I felt tears prick, though I didn't want to let them. "Maggie?" I asked, voice trembling. She didn't answer, but reached downward, as though cradling a child. I noticed a small bundled shape at her feet, a dirty rag, a tiny shoe. My breath caught. I sank to my knees, pulling out my gloves. She didn't move as I approached. I knelt beside her, flashlight trained on the bundle. The rag was damp, dark. I carefully unwrapped it. Small fingers, pale and stiff, an embalmed brush of hair, a girl's corpse wrapped tight. The smell was nauseating, a mix of rot and sweetness. Her face was intact, eyes closed like she slept. I felt bile rise. I hurried to wrap the body in a forensic sheet. The ghostly woman watched, gaze grateful and sad. As I lifted the sheet, I realized the girl's locket had the same date, same inscription. Maggie Turner, July 19th, 2005. My knees trembled. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Tears blurred my vision as I gently lifted her, careful not to disturb bone or hair. The specter faded backward, wordless, then vanished among the pines. One heartbeat later, the scent of damp air filled my nostrils, as though she dissolved into mist. I shook my head, forcing calm. I radioed, "Crime scene. 47 to CSI, bring a stretcher. I have a minor female victim. Confirm ID as Maggie Turner, missing since 2005. Proceed carefully, this is likely just one of many." Over the radio came, "Copy, 47, we're on our way." I allowed Collins to help me lift Maggie gently onto the stretcher. No need for questions, my mind already reeled. Too many bodies, too many ghosts. The forest had claimed them, locked them in its cycle of blood magic. If we didn't break it completely, more would come. We carried her back toward the main path, passing the embers, the symbols on the oak, the circle of stones. Each footprint we retraced felt like a wound opening. Collins glanced at me. "What now?" I breathed out, jaw aching. "Now we uproot every last trace. We'll immerse forensics here until this trail is nothing but dust and ash. We call every witness, revisit old missing persons, examine every report. This place loses its darkness tonight." I paused, seeing the trees leaning in, as though listening. If we don't, this will never end. Collins nodded. We loaded Maggie's body into the CSI vehicle, the stretcher rattling across the pavement. I lingered a moment, gazing into the woods. The forest exhaled, branches trembling. Then I turned away. The wheel of investigation was set in motion. As long as I drew breath, I would break the circle. The ache in my chest tightened as I walked back through the pine-scented air, knowing the forest would never let me go, but I wouldn't let it swallow another child. I had to hold it accountable, strip it bare until it bled all its secrets. Because out here, in this valley of blood and bones, justice was as thorny as the undergrowth. But I would find my way through. I stepped away from the CSI van just long enough to let the full weight of what we had uncovered settle in. The air felt charged, as if the forest itself was bracing for something, an echo, perhaps, of the horror we'd just unearthed. I could still see Maggie's small body, whisked away in a body bag, her tiny form an indictment of how long this had been allowed to fester. I glanced at Collins, who looked as hollowed out as I felt. Finally, he broke the silence. "Sir, what now? Are we heading back to the station, or—" I cut him off. "Number, we keep pushing forward. We root this out at its source." I motioned him to follow me to the edge of the clearing where the embers still smoldered, half buried beneath pine needles. "We need to know how deep this goes. We locate the graves of the other children, identify the people who've disappeared, and we connect every dot between those disappearances in this place, without leaving a single stone unturned." He nodded, expression steeled. I felt a flicker of something, relief maybe, that he was as committed as I was. But relief was a luxury. The air seemed to thicken as we stepped back into the forest, heading uphill toward where Stephen's notebook and the symbols had been found. The path was now illuminated by portable crime scene lanterns that forensics had set up like a line of dusty beacons stretching through the trees. I watched as technicians in Tyvek suits dusted the bark of the oak for prints, measured the circumference of the carved circle, and photographed every inch of debris around the clearing. I could sense their reluctance, the way they kept looking into the trees, as if expecting to see Maggie's ghost or some darker entity watching them. I gripped my flashlight tighter and forced myself to focus on the task. We had to catalog every scrap of evidence. I crouched beside a forensics cameraman who was snapping images of the ash patterns. "How's the luminescence on that circle of stones?" I asked, voice low so only he and I could hear. He tilted the camera slightly, capturing the glow of the embers even as they died. "Detective, it looks like someone stoked these coals within the past 24 hours. I can't say for certain, but right now it's still warm. The circle's fresh, too fresh." I absorbed that, feeling my stomach clench. "Thank you." I rose and moved to where the oak's scratched bark bore those symbols, an inverted star inside a circle, corners roughly etched, blood dried into the crevices. I knelt to brush my gloved fingers over the marks. They were shallow, like someone went at them with nails or a knife, but not too deeply. A few flecks of dark rust-colored residue clung in the grooves. I pressed a small swab against the bark, swirling gently. If my hunch was correct, those flecks would yield traces of human blood. I tucked the swab into an evidence file and stood. Collins approached, holding a stack of folders. "I went through the case files while we were out there," he said quietly. 2 other missing persons reports this year, ages 9 and 12, both vanished near public campsites 15 miles north. No leads, no bodies. These folks moved to Pinewood County recently, out-of-towners. They reported their kids missing, but the cases went cold. My pulse quickened again. I recognized the pattern. New families who didn't belong, kids taken before anyone could notice. "Bring everything here," I said. He nodded and handed me the folders. One by one, I flipped through photocopied missing persons posters, police reports, notes about witnesses who claimed they heard strange chanting at night. A mother's entry. "I thought it was a deer," she wrote, but the sounds came too close, like a child crying. Another report mentioned a father who said he saw a woman in a white dress standing in the tree line, her head leaning far back, mouth open in an impossible silent scream. They dismissed it as hallucination, but I knew better. It was the same ghost we'd seen in that glade. I turned to Collins. We need to map every single disappearance over the last 20 years. See if there's a concentric pattern around Cedar Woods. He pulled out a notepad, pen ready. We huddled, sketching dotted circles and timelines. The father's case was in 2008. Another was 2012. Then 2015. Each disappearance occurred near a new moon, roughly 7 days after the full. That could be coincidental, but with Maggie's locket dated July 19th, 2005, also a new moon by lunar calendars, it felt impossible to ignore. The symbols might have been designed to channel power during the darkest nights. I leaned back, eyes closed, letting the forest's hush press against me. If the pattern held, there should be a cycle. New moon sacrifices to some ancient local legend that demanded blood in exchange for fertile soil or bountiful wildlife. The kind of backwoods occult rites passed down as rumor and myth until daredevils turned them into truth. The realization made bile rise. I pictured the families who relocated, unaware of this tradition. Their children ensnared by a ritual older than the county itself, victims of a creed that treated human life as fertilizer. I snapped my eyes open and looked at Collins. We have to alert the families. Get the news out. Any child out here during the next new moon could be in danger. He nodded. I'll draft a press release. Advisory for parents to keep kids off trails at night, and we coordinate with Child Protective Services to check on relocated families. I turned to the forensics tech. Can I talk to you a sec? She joined us, camera dangling from her neck like a curving branch. I showed her the map we'd sketched. We need to canvass the locations for evidence. Clothing fibers, remnants of ritual paraphernalia, candles, bones, that sort of thing. Have your team comb the sites before the ground thaws or any prints are lost. She nodded, eyes grave. Understood. I squared my shoulders. Good, let's keep moving. We reached the far edge of the clearing where the ravine dropped off into a dense tangle. I paused, shining my flashlight down the slope. Muddy banks led to a narrow stream bed that drained away, twisting into darkness. I climbed down, steps measured, careful not to leave my own prints. At the base I found more traces of shallow graves, earth that looked too freshly turned. I knelt and brushed a hand across the ridges. Small bone fragments, flecks of cloth, the brittle fragments of what might have been tiny jewelry. My throat tightened. I swallowed. Evidence, I called up. Collins slipped down beside me. What do you see? I pointed to a handful of deerskin shards and brittle yellowed fabric. Probably animal hides mixed with children's clothes, to mask the smell, maybe. This was where they cleaned off before offering the blood. I felt bile rise again. Damn it. I swabbed around the area, tucking samples into specimen vials. I heard a twig snap behind me. I froze, light reflexively swinging around. Nothing but shadows, but I felt eyes on me, an unblinking stare from somewhere out there. I stood and backed away slowly, making sure to leave my footprints distinct. Clear evidence I'd been there. I knew whatever lurked in the woods would watch me, but I needed to leave no doubt as to the timeline of my investigation. We climbed back up, and I noticed a faint glow of dawn creeping over the horizon, an ashen pink light through the tops of the pines. Even as the sun rose, the forest felt colder, as if it rejected the day. I moved back toward the edge of the clearing, catching movement out of the corner of my eye. Curtains of white fabric, snatches of cloth, flapping high in the trees like totems. I shined my flashlight into their tangled forms. They were lengths of gauze, homemade cloth ribbons, some stained brown, some still stark white. At least a dozen pieces draped from branches overhead, fluttering in the wind. One ribbon had a child's pink locket entwined, a duplicate of Maggie's, tarnished and half buried in a knot. My heart pounded as I realized these were markers. Boundary markers, maybe, demarcating a territory. A warning to anyone entering the woods during the new moon. I shuddered, imagining those ribbons swaying overhead, like effigies condemning all who crossed into that territory. I looked at Collins. Collect those, we bag them as evidence. Each one could have traces of blood, DNA. He did as I asked, tearing them from the branches and wrapping them carefully. By now, uniformed officers had arrived to reinforce our perimeter. A sergeant approached, face creased with fatigue. Detective Holloway, forensics needs direction on where to dig the rest of those graves. We'll need to call in heavy equipment after daylight. I nodded. Yes. Bring in subsurface radar, let's map out where the other pit sites are, and coordinate with the medical examiner's office. If there's a way to identify those remains from bone fragments, we do it. I want names. He swallowed. Sir, are you sure you want us to dig here? Some of my guys are calling it a suicide pit. Like this place drove people to kill themselves. I felt anger surge. Number. They didn't kill themselves, they were dumped here. We set things right. He nodded stiffly, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. Back in the station at 8:30, I perched on the edge of my desk with a mug of room temperature coffee, bitter and barely sipping. My thumbs tapped a rhythm against the handle. Files were spread out before me. Missing persons reports from 2005 to now. Weather logs, lunar calendars, local historical records. The more I crisscrossed dates, the clearer it became. Every disappearance matched a new moon, every once in a full cycle of about 29 days. 3 times a year, children vanished. Families relocated. Some, the Carter family included, new to Pinewood County. They didn't know the land's history. The small newspaper archives spoke of old tales. Settlers who practiced a kind of ritual they believed ensured their crops flourished. Over the decades, the practice evolved. No longer about fertility, but about some warped sense of balance. The symbol etched into bark matched descriptions from a journal dated 1912, hidden in the attic of the old Pinewood County Historical Museum. I pulled up the PDF on my computer. Dated August 1912, a man named Jonas Whitaker wrote about feeding the spirit of the pines with the blood of the innocent, so the land will not revolt. My hands trembled. Jonas had been the first known documented sacrifice. His journal included crude sketches of a circle of stones and the inverted star, just like the one on that oak. The ritual had been dormant for decades, until 2005, when it flared up again. And now it had revived with lethal force. I sank lower, leaning against the desk, replaying my first night on this case. Emily's hollow eyes. Stephen's babbling about they, as if the forest itself were a living god. I thought about the victims, those children. Little faces frozen in twisted smiles, eyes closed, maybe believing they would wake to laughter in the morning. Instead, their bodies fed some bitter ritual. I felt bile rise again. I thought about my daughter, 8 years old, asleep in her bedroom back home, her nightlight casting playful shadows. The thought of her out here made my vision blur. I blinked, took a deep breath. Not her, I whispered. Not my daughter. I pushed myself up and started typing an email to the chief. Urgent. We need a county-wide alert. curfew advisory for minors, request Homeland Security liaison due to possible human remains trafficking. Also, reach out to FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. These victims span decades. I pressed send. That morning, I met with the Carters and 2 other families whose children were missing. Their living rooms felt bright, the sunlight warm on the furniture, but each parent's eyes were haunted. Mr. Carter kept his hands clasped, knuckles white, as if holding himself together. I gave them the grim details, the pattern of sacrifices, the graves, the linkage to a century-old ritual. Mrs. Carter's lips trembled. "So, you're saying, my daughter survived a sacrifice?" She pressed a hand to her chest, breathing shallow. "I think you saved her," I said gently, "but we have reason to believe others did not. Maggie Turner died here years ago, and 3 more were found yesterday. We are working every lead, but please, if any of you hear anything, chants, howls, strange whispers, call us immediately." They nodded, eyes red-rimmed. I left them with counselors from victim services who arrived at my request. It felt like a hollow victory. Saving Emily felt monumental. But how many more? I tried not to think of the faces I'd seen, of Maggie's stiff body wrapped in that forensic sheet. I pushed it away, but it lingered like a specter in my mind. The afternoon sun filtered through my office window as I filled out paperwork. The sergeant poked his head in. "Detective, SWAT is ready to move in on the farmhouse. Excavation team arriving in 2 hours." I looked up at him. "Good. I want to set up an exclusion zone around the site to protect it. And contact GIS. I want aerial reconnaissance of that area. See if there's more ritual circles deeper into the forest. We need a complete topographical survey." He nodded. "On it." He left, and I exhaled, feeling my shoulders slump. I rubbed my temples, willing the pounding headache to ease. The ticking clock on the wall felt louder than normal, as if reminding me that time was slipping away, that the next new moon could bring another trembling knock at someone's door. I thought of the forest, silent and waiting. I could almost hear the rustle of fabric, the ribbons tied to branches, fluttering like silent cries for salvation. Late that evening, I drove most of the way home without switching on the headlights, let the darkness guide me. I needed the night to clear my thoughts, even though the forest's emptiness had never felt so heavy. When I pulled into my driveway, steam rose from the asphalt where dew collected. I sat in the car for a minute, staring at the dark tree line that bordered my yard. Somewhere out there, the echoes of that ritual lived on. Faint chants that no one could hear unless they listened closely in the dead of night. I got out and moved toward my front door, the porch light coloring me in amber. My 8-year-old puppy scampered around my legs, tail wagging, oblivious to the world's horrors. I scratched him behind the ears, felt his warm fur, and let a tight smile slip through. For a moment, I almost believed I could leave the darkness here, at the edge of my yard. Inside, the house was silent. My wife at her shift, my daughter already asleep. I flicked on the hallway light and passed photos of birthdays, family vacations, science projects pinned to the fridge. I paused at a drawing my daughter had made. A stick figure family under a rainbow, birds flying overhead. I knelt to erase the worry lines from my forehead so she wouldn't see them. I kissed the top of her head, whispering, "Daddy's home." She mumbled something in her sleep and turned over. I retreated to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared out the window at the backyard where the trees loomed. I thought of the horrors I'd seen to that day. A mother's terror, a child's stiff corpse, a ghostly apparition, the ancient symbols now etched into my brain. I drained the water and felt sleep pull at my eyelids, but I resisted. I had to stay sharp. Tomorrow we would coordinate the bunker search, interview neighbors with long memories, trace every record of Jonas Whittaker and his descendants. We would challenge the pact, incise the ritual with bright light. We would not let the darkness claim one more innocent. But I also knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that what we fought was not simply men in masks or a gang of occultists. It was something far older, woven into the sinew of these woods, and I was determined to bleed that darkness out, bone by bone, until every sacrifice pit was aired out, every victim named, every parent absolved of guilt. I would bring that forest to trial, even if it meant returning to this edge of shadow night after night. Because as long as one family trembled in fear of the dark, as long as one child was missing, I, Detective Marcus Holloway, would stand guard at the border of nightmares, and I would not let the pines consume another drop of innocent blood. I switched off the kitchen light and made my way up the stairs, each creaking step a reminder that the world slept while I bore its nightmares. I lay in bed and stared into the darkness, willing slumber to come. But all I saw were leafy shadows creeping across the ceiling, and I heard in my mind the faint rustle of the ribbons tied to trees, the echo of Maggie's ghostly tears, the hush of the creek running red beneath the moon. And I knew that sleep would not come easy, or at all, not until the circles were broken, because the forest was patient, and it would wait. And for a detective like me, patience was another name for eternal vigil. And so I lay there, eyes open, listening to the silence, waiting for the forest to make its next move, and knowing, with absolute certainty, that when it did, I would be ready. That night, I would pray for dawn, and then, once the sun rose, I would dive back into the woods that had swallowed so many lives, because the pact had to end, and no darkness, no matter how deep, could resist the blade of truth shining through. The sun had barely peaked above the treetops when I was back at the station, bleary-eyed and clutching a fresh cup of coffee that had already gone cold. My office light flickered on, buzzing enough to jolt me into awareness. In front of me lay stacks of reports, maps, and the one relic I could not stop staring at. Jonas Whittaker's journal, open to the page with that crude, blood-red circle. I winced as I reread the jagged handwriting. On the new moon's cusp, the pines drink out of loss. Offer the flesh of innocence. Let the earth breathe. Every time those words registered in my mind, I felt my chest tighten, as though the words themselves were binding me to the forest. A knock on the door drew me out of my spiraling thoughts. Lieutenant Forbes poked his head in, face tight with lines of exhaustion. "You got a minute, Holloway?" he asked quietly, stepping inside. I waved him in, pushing aside a pile of missing child posters stamped with red closed markers. He closed the door and leaned against the frame. "How long do you think Jonas's lineage has been active?" I rubbed my temples. Longer than any living memory. His entries reference older rituals, mentions of native legends about tree spirits that demanded tribute. But every documented sacrifice in my notes starts in 1912, when Whittaker wrote his journal. So either he invented it or synthesized fragments of older traditions. Forbes nodded slowly. He creased his brow. I spoke with the museum curator. There are boxed-up letters from a great-granddaughter of Whittaker, Sarah Whittaker, lived here until 1984. She tried to burn everything in her father's house, claiming the pines whispered dark things. But some pages weren't destroyed. We recovered fragments, references to keepers, families sworn to continue the pact until the land rose in grievance. Perhaps she failed. Perhaps the ritual found fresh blood again after 2005. I felt my jaw tighten. So there have been accomplices, keepers, over the generations. He exhaled deeply. I'm assigning you and Collins to interview older residents, anyone who might recall odd gatherings in the woods, disappearances before 1970. Somebody out there has to remember unusual rites or unmarked graves. Maybe we find clues to break this at its root. I nodded. We'll go today. By mid-morning, Collins and I were driving down an old gravel road toward a neglected trailer park on the outskirts of Pinewood County. I studied the collections of rusted trailers, front yards littered with mismatched furniture, empty soda cans discarded like confetti. We pulled up in front of Trailer 12, home of the only living sibling of Sarah Whitaker. Her younger brother, Amos Whitaker, now 82, crippled by arthritis and stooped with time. His daughter, Pamela, met us at the door. The same gray eyes, the same set jaw as the portraits I'd seen of Jonas and Sarah. She ushered us into a cramped living room, strewn with decades of accumulated clutter. Faded photographs lined the walls. A stern-faced Jonas in a wool coat. A smiling Sarah at age 16, and Amos as a young man standing beside a tall oak. We sat opposite him in mismatched chairs. He wore an old flannel shirt and slacks, hands resting on a cane. His eyes followed us warily. I cleared my throat. Mr. Whitaker, I'm Detective Holloway, and this is Trooper Collins. We'd like to ask you about your family's history here, about any knowledge of rituals in Cedar Woods. His expression froze. He took a deep, rattling breath. My parents. They believed in harmony, not ritual slaughter. But my father, he was obsessed with the forest. Said it held spirits, and we must heed their whispers. He believed we owed the woods something pure, something to gain its favor. He coughed, eyes misting. My parents sacrificed eggs and small game when Jonas was young, so the soil would stay fertile. Then my sister Sarah discovered one of his journals. She thought it was madness. She destroyed what she could. Father died soon after, and Sarah left home for good. She said she could no longer bear to see what he planned. I nodded, listening, heart pounding. Did Sarah ever mention other sacrifices? Children, perhaps? He closed his eyes. She alluded to something darker before she left. She said Jonas's greed grew heavier, that he began believing that offerings must escalate. She refused to speak further. But I saw shadows in the wood, marks, symbols carved into trees near our land. I surmised he'd done more than benign offerings. But I kept my head down, said nothing. I felt a surge of both relief and dread. Confirmation that Whitaker Line never abandoned the ritual completely, that accomplices perhaps remained. I pressed on. Did you ever find evidence of victims, graves, other than the one pit near the oak? He shook his head slowly. Number? The woods were large, and I was a boy. Everyone thought the woods were a place of harmless superstition. Only when you children of the new century began to disappear did I realize the extent. He spat, anger overtaking him. My father's madness, my blood, helped it take root. But Sarah's attempts to end it failed. My stomach cramped. What happened to Sarah? He closed his eyes, voice thick. She moved to Charleston, never contacted us again. I never knew if she survived or died safely. She left nothing. I exchanged a glance with Collins. No lead on Sarah meant an unknown guardian of whatever journal fragments persisted, perhaps still directing rituals. We thanked Amos and left, heavy with the knowledge that Whitaker's lineage had never truly severed its grip. Next, we visited Clara Beaumont, age 86, a longtime teacher and resident just outside the woods. She lived in a modest brick house with wind chimes on every porch post. When we mentioned rituals and missing children, her face went ashen. She motioned us to sit. You don't know me, I'm just Miss Beaumont, taught history at Pinewood High. But I knew your great-grandfather Jonas. Brilliant, charming, until he wasn't. He became obsessed with pagan lore, convinced that native legends required tribute to keep the forest benevolent. My students complained of his lectures, how he praised blood offerings. But I thought it was crackpot talk, until my grandson disappeared. She pressed a tissue to her lips, tears welling. We never found him. They said he wandered off the trail, but I know Jonas had marked him, just as he had marked others. I saw Jonas with a knife on a new moon. I saw him, heard chants in the pines late at night when I was out for a walk. I thought I was hallucinating. I left town soon after. Her voice wavered. He died in '68. Accident, they claimed. But I suspect he was atoning, or maybe he thought he could free the forest. I felt her pain as an anchor behind my sternum. Thank you, Miss Beaumont. Your testimony may help bring closure to families. She nodded, shaking. I hope you break whatever curse he left behind. We left with her blessing, but I knew there was more to uncover. Jonas's disciples, perhaps a hidden notebook Sarah failed to burn. Back at the station, Collins and I pored over our combined notes from Amos and Clara. We marked on a map every carved symbol reported since 1950, every flash of ritual sighting. Each location formed concentric arcs around cedar woods, widening over time. The densest cluster sat near the old Whitaker property, abandoned now, but once a crossroads for dark gatherings. We agreed to stake out that property the next night, under cover of darkness, with backup and cameras, to see if any clandestine activity remained. Late afternoon found me at the archives of the county courthouse. I requested tax records, deeds, anything tied to Jonas, Sarah, and Amos's parcels. The records revealed that Jonas's estate was sold to a church in 1969. The building, St. Anne's Chapel, was demolished in 1972. The land remained vacant until the county expropriated it in 1980, converting it to protected forest land. That meant every ceremony happened on public land, effectively hidden in anonymity. People came from out of town, left no paper trails. I realized how difficult it would be to track participants, no property to tie to suspects. But I also noticed a peculiar detail. In 2004, a local group called Friends of Cedar Woods held a fundraising event. Their brochure featured a monologue about reviving traditions passed down from settlers who loved the land. Merely a nature lover group or something more sinister? I pulled the brochure photocopy. The words tradition and tribute were underlined. I printed their membership list. That might give us living participants. I boxed it all up to take back to Collins. By early evening, the county advisory had gone out. Curfew for minors. Parents urged to keep children indoors after sundown. Community meetings were arranged, counselors to reassure parents, volunteers to patrol trails. I spent hours fielding frantic calls from journalists, curious neighbors, and concerned citizens. Each asked for reassurance. Each voice shattered a little when I told them we were still investigating. I felt the weight of their hope, knowing that any misstep could cost another child's life. At around midnight, we set up at the edge of the old Whitaker property, joined by a small SWAT contingent and forensics techs. We parked 3 black SUVs just off Cedar Creek Road, lights dimmed, radios silenced. I felt the cold creep through my jacket, needle pricking at my skin. Collins and I slipped through a gap in the police line, headlamps dimmed to minimal. We moved toward the cleared patch where St. Anne's Chapel once stood. The earth was soft, grassy from recent rain. Our boots made nearly no sound. Ahead, 2 officers held night vision cameras trained on a circle of weeds where the foundation had been. I recognized the spot from Jonas's journal's map, etched with crude lines to show the chapel's boundaries. It was here he had perhaps tried to perform rites before the building was demolished. Now it lay bare, exposed to scrutiny. I whispered to Collins, "Check for movement near the old foundation. We look for fresh footprints, drapings, anything indicating a modern ritual." He gave a curt nod, adjusting his handset to overhear the feed from the SWAT radio. We spread out, scanning the perimeter. I felt a tangible current in the air, as though the cleared earth itself pulsed with expectancy. A tall oak at the edge of the clearing cast a long, spidery shadow across the ground. My flashlight beam caught something. The glimmer of cloth snagged on a root. White gauze, fluttering faintly in the breeze. I crouched to inspect. Part of a ribbon, draped as though marking a boundary line. I snapped a quick photo and signaled an officer, pointing to it. He bagged it, eyes grim. As we moved to the center, I noticed a set of footprints forming a perfect circle in the damp grass. Large boot prints and smaller barefoot impressions. The smaller prints were almost childlike. A woman's foot, tapered at the heel, and paired with a child's shoe print. The boot prints cut through both sets, crushing them to mush. I knelt to examine closely. Muddy edges, shallow water that had pooled in each depression. I noted the footprints led toward the east, away from the center, but encircled it thrice before departing. My heart thudded. "They came here tonight," I whispered. This circle wasn't formed by tires. Someone waded in, barefoot, unalerted. Then someone wearing boots stomped those same footprints down. Collins frowned. "That indicates 2 participants, one barefoot, one with boots." I nodded. Maybe a child and an adult, the cycle starting again. I felt a flash of raw anger. This can't happen. We surveyed further. A handful of shallow dents in the ground, about the size of a toddler's shoe heel, embedded 6 inches from the center, in a triangle formation. It looked like someone knelt there and struck the ground, prodding at the dirt. I pulled a small trowel from my pack and scraped at the loam. Beneath, I found fragments of ceramic, torn bits of what might be a children's teacup painted with flowers. I chipped away more. Tiny shards of bone mashed into the soil, brittle ivory flecks beneath a root. I had to steel myself. Any excavation now would disturb potential remains. I covered it up gently, replaced the sod. There was no doubt in my mind. Someone had staged a ceremony here, likely sacrificing an animal or perhaps a child, though the latter would be too desperate. I radioed for forensics dogs with cadaver sniffing capability. Within 15 minutes, a canine handler with 2 German shepherds joined us. One hound, Daisy, strained on the leash, muzzle low, tail stiff. We moved in a slow circle. The dog's nose waved above the ground, and then she let out a soft whine, nose planted at a spot near the east edge of the clearing. I felt my heartbeat rock. I dropped to my knees and cleared the sod. Underneath, I found a small, caked bundle, a children's sock, now dark with rot and damp. I unfolded it to reveal a tiny finger bone, brittle and etched with the marks of scavenging insects. The handler dropped to one knee and whispered, "We've got remains here, needs full exhumation." I nodded, right away. My phone buzzed. A message from the coroner. Emily's initial scan showed mild traumatic brain injury, but she'd be released in 2 days if no complications arose. I typed a quick reply of reassurance. Then I dipped a swab into latex gloves and bagged the fragments. By the time dawn threatened through bamboo-thick clouds, we'd unearthed 2 more partial skeletons. One of a child roughly 5 years old, the other a preteen. Both lay inside shallow pits, heads aimed east, arms splayed as though trying to reach out. The bones were yellowed, as if long buried, likely from disappearances spanning a decade or more. I felt my stomach churn. In my mind, scenes raced. Families waiting for children who never returned. Friends left searching for answers. Each body here told a story of betrayal, lured deep into the woods by caretakers sworn to keep the land secret. Now, the secret lay exposed in morning frost and tainted soil. I watched as forensics carefully labeled and boxed bone fragments. The canine team gingerly led the dogs away. Daisy walked obediently, tail down. The earth felt hollow, as though some cavern had opened beneath it. I set my boot on a cracked tablet, an embedded stone at the clearing center with faint runes matching Whitaker's symbols. It felt like destiny anchored here, a geography of guilt. Forbes joined me, face haggard from lack of sleep. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "We got them, Holloway. The families will want to know as soon as we identify names." I nodded, though I felt numb. "Make it public. The pattern's gone from under the forest's skin. Now we expose every guardian who participated." He frowned. "You think there's more coming?" I looked into the gray sky. "If the next new moon arrives and they haven't been unmasked, someone will try again." He sighed and rubbed his eyes. "Work the data points. Any names tied to the Friends of Cedar Woods or descendants of Whitaker line. We close them down." I returned to my car with Collins as the sun finally slid into view, painting the pines in pale amber. We drove back to the station in heavy silence. In my mind, I glimpsed Maggie's little face, the children's bones now labeled as unknowns, and Emily's frightened eyes when she'd first seen me. I felt guilt, fatigue, determination, all of it coalescing into something colder, an oath to protect the living by honoring the dead. Inside, I resolved that we would not wait another day, another new moon. I would lead this investigation until every accomplice was identified, every child named, every memory laid to rest. That night, I sat at my desk with a list of names. Local group members, descendants, anyone with ties to Cedar Woods. Collins and I planned interviews and surveilled known suspects. We coordinated with neighboring counties to share our findings. I realized the fight was far from over. It was a generational purge, one that required unwavering vigilance. The forest outside seemed to press its shadows against my office window, whispering of what lay beneath each root and stone. I took a ragged breath. "We'll finish this," I muttered to the empty room. "We'll end it." I gathered my papers, turned off the desk lamp, and walked into the hallway. The overhead lights were dimmed for the overnight shift, casting long shadows across the linoleum. I paused at a bulletin board covered in photographs. Missing children, suspects, old crime scenes. One photo showed Jonas Whitaker as a young man, eyes bright with fervor. By his side, Sarah, her eyes dark with conviction. I felt their gaze follow me, pleading for justice. I pinned one more photograph. A color-copied flyer of Maggie Turner, taken age 6, her cheeks round, curls bouncing, wearing a dress with daisies. I stared at it until my eyelids drooped. Tomorrow, I would wake before the sun, coordinate the outreach, schedule interviews, follow up with forensics, and lay every stone bare. But tonight, before sleep, if it came, I allowed myself one moment to remember why I did this. To ensure that any child out there could play in the woods without fear, to let parents breathe without terror. I picked up my jacket and walked to the door. As I stepped into the corridor, the lights flickered in a slow, rhythmic pattern, casting the shadows of pines across the walls. I tightened my grip on the strap of my holster and whispered a promise to every lost soul. I will find them, I will name them, I will stop this. And as I walked into the night, I felt a hush settle over the station, a stillness laden with expectation. I knew the forest would not yield its final secret easily, but I also knew that as long as I walked the line between shadow and light, held its whispers at bay, that ancient circle charting its course across generations could be cut, its power broken. Dawn would come, and with daylight I would press on, blade drawn, to sever this blood-soaked vow once and for all. I slipped out of the station in the quiet after midnight, heart still thudding against my ribs as though the forest's pulse had found a new rhythm inside me. The hallway lights behind the glass door faded to darkness, leaving the world outside shrouded in a thin haze of streetlight glow. My breath came in measured drafts of cold air, and every step on the asphalt felt like crossing into a threshold between the safety of steel and glass and the hungry world beyond. I knew the night shift would register my absence only when the logroom clerk noticed the empty chair and tried to call me. By then, I intended to be well on my way to the house where I believed the final pieces of the circle awaited exposure. Collins met me at the patrol car with 2 steaming cups of coffee, already creased with cold rings from condensation. His eyes held the same grim resolve I felt knotting in my gut. I took a cup, nodding in silent thanks. "Got names ready?" I asked, voice level but strained. He slid the manila folder across the console. Inside were photos, addresses, short profiles, local landowner Paul Henshaw, his daughter Marlene, retired forestry worker Ray Barrett, 2 others whose family lines traced to acquaintances of the late Sarah Whitaker. Each played a role, either shepherding land for Friends of Cedar Woods fundraisers or quietly funding lumber restoration projects, always with vague, pious answers when asked about historical traditions. But the moment they'd realized we had human remains, I knew they would not remain idle. We drove in silence, the coffee warming our hands, until the car approached a narrow lane that cut off the beaten path. Crooked wooden signs marked Henshaw property, private on either side, but the gate latch drooped loose as though half forgotten. I killed the engine and stepped out, keys clutched in one hand, flashlight in the other. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, and I flicked to low beam, the light forming a narrow halo that stretched into the darkness. We crossed the threshold into a small, abandoned yard where the moonlight turned the peeling barn door into a silhouette of jagged teeth raking the sky. The barn had once served as storage for tree sap collectors, now rotted and sagging. Its wooden boards were warped by time, some missing altogether, revealing glimpses of dusty crates inside. "First target, Paul Henshaw," I said. "In that farmhouse, I think." Collins pointed his light over to a low-slung, single-story house with a sagging porch, its windows dark. A threadbare American flag drooped limply from a rotted pole. We approached the front door on tiptoes, boots silent on the dew-slick wood. I felt the hairs on my arms rise as though someone, or something, were watching. I laid my flashlight against the doorframe, nudged it open with my boot. The hinges squealed like a wounded animal. I signaled Collins inside, hand on my firearm. We slipped through the entryway, flashlights carving the dark. Inside, the air was stale, scented with mothballs and wood smoke that had long since dissipated. A single overhead bulb flickered fitfully in the corner, but it didn't illuminate the whole space. The living room was sparsely furnished. A sagging couch, a round table toppled, family photos stained by age, and I swept the beam across the floor. Nothing moved, no footprints, no dust disturbed in days. I crouched beside the fireplace hearth and noticed faint grease smudges on the brick, forming a pattern. An inverted star inside a circle, roughly etched. My breath caught. Someone had drawn this here, but with what? I stamped to avoid rubbing my boots across evidence. The residue looked oily, dark brown, almost a shade of clotted blood. I snapped a photo and rose. Collins had already eased into the adjacent kitchen. Empty, counters bare except for a rusted can opener. I heard his soft voice. "Back door's ajar." I flicked my light toward a narrow hall leading to bedrooms. We moved cautiously, rounding corners, each creak of floorboard echoing. We found Henshaw in the master bedroom, shirtless, seated on the edge of the bed, head pressed in his hands. He looked up when we entered, eyes red-rimmed, a soft whimper escaping his throat. He was gaunt, pale, like he hadn't eaten in days. A sword-like nerve of recognition shot through me. Henshaw's face matched a figure in a grainy photo I'd seen dated 2012, standing beside the old Whitaker oak at a community fundraiser, smiling brightly. Now his eyes brimmed with guilt. I could almost taste the tension. I holstered my weapon, stepping close enough to see the sweat on his brow. "Mr. Henshaw," I said softly, "we need to talk." He swallowed. "I wasn't going to hurt her," he whispered. Collins knelt to handcuff him. Henshaw's shaking hands offered no resistance. "Who?" I asked, voice taut. He choked, staring at the floor. "It was the child," he said, head shaking. "I didn't want to kill the child, I swear, but they said it had to be done. They said it would end the curse if I helped." My pulse pounded like a sledgehammer. "Who said that?" He closed his eyes. "Barrett. Ray Barrett." My heart sank. I'd seen his name among the county's old-timers, a man lauded for his forestry work. If he'd been orchestrating these horrors, I had to find him next. We secured Henshaw in the back seat of the patrol car, stacked in the dawn haze. His pale form slumped against the headrest as though any moment he would slip into unconsciousness. Overnight, I'd already wired the farmhouse for a full SWAT presence. The new leads demanded a concerted response. Collins drove Henshaw to the county lockup. I climbed into the passenger seat and stared at his face in the rearview mirror as he clutched the bars. Behind me, the sun sank blood-red behind the woods, an omen, or perhaps just smoke from a distant controlled burn. I didn't trust omens anymore. Only evidence mattered. I slid out of the car, flashing my badge to the jailer. Inside, Henshaw crumpled onto the bench, eyes fixed on the floor. I asked the booking officer, "Keep him hydrated. Forensics will need his Prince blood sample." Also, he gave me Barrett's name. "I want Barrett's house checked immediately." The booking officer nodded, picking up the phone. I left, each footstep heavier than the last. I hopped back in my car and dialed dispatch. 47 to dispatch, I said. "Check Ray Barrett's property. He's listed 2 miles north on Pinewood Road. Request backup. I'm heading there." The static crackled. "Copy, 47. We'll inform Barrett." "ETA all units 10 minutes. I thumbed off the radio and peeled out, tires spitting gravel. Barrett's house was an isolated cabin crouched beneath towering pines. As I approached, I saw 2 sheriff's cruisers and a K-9 unit circling the property. The yard was littered with wood chips, as though someone had recently carved something. Faint wisps of smoke curled from a rusted chimney. Someone still living here. I killed the engine, holstered my gun, and joined the perimeter. A sergeant steered me to a spot by the front steps. "We got Barrett sitting on his porch," he said. "He surrendered without incident." I breathed out, relief and determination knotting inside me. Barrett sat in a battered rocking chair, hands folded in his lap, eyes hollow. The sergeant called him over, but he shook his head. As I stepped closer, I noticed Barrett's hands were stained dark, long fingernails fringed with brown grime. A deep scowl carved his face, but as our eyes met, his expression cracked into something resembling sorrow. "Mr. Barrett," I said, voice low, I need to see where you kept your materials. He sighed, standing, limping slightly as he shuffled toward a side door. I followed with Collins at my side. Inside, the cabin was littered with chicken feathers spread on the floor, candles melted into conical shapes, symbols drawn in ash around an altar. The smell was oppressive, rotting meat and incense. On the altar lay a scale, old paper pages stained red with faded ink, each scrawled with the circle-shaped symbol. I traced a finger across a collection of small braided feathers, a child's size, dyed in patterns resembling ritual tokens. I shivered. This was Barrett's workshop, his crucible of horrors. "Where do you keep the bones?" I asked. Barrett nodded, leading me down a steep staircase into a narrow cellar. The walls were lined with driftwood and bundles of dried herbs. In the dim glow of my flashlight, I saw cages filled with tiny birds, sparrows and finches, some hanging upside down, others huddled in corners with dull eyes. Their chests pulsed weakly. My stomach churned. He pointed farther in, a crude wooden box, lid slightly ajar. I knelt, careful, opened it, and saw fragments of small human bones mixed with splintered wooden shards. Shards from toys, perhaps. Each piece was marked, labeled with faded names. Maggie Turner, 2005. Benson Child, 2012. Young Autry, 2015. My throat closed. Barrett watched me with unflinching gaze. "Each sacrifice stoked the earth's hunger," he said, voice flat. I tried to stop after Maggie, but the forest, it asked again. My mind reeled. 15 lives reduced to fragments here, each ritual binding the forest more tightly. I collected bone samples in evidence bags, all the while feeling Barrett's scarred gaze on me. Back upstairs, I cuffed him to the banister. He didn't resist. "You'll be charged with multiple counts of murder," I told him, watching his trembling. "You're going to prison." He closed his eyes. "The forest keeps calling," he murmured. My father's voice, Jonas's ghost, whispering that the land is still hungry. I stepped outside into the morning light that carved long shadows across the cabin's yard. Neighbors had wandered over, faces filled with awe and horror as they saw Barrett escorted by officers. I turned to Collins. "Have forensic teams cordon off this property. We need every scrap, every feather, every drop of blood tested. And I want to issue an arrest warrant for anyone else linked to Friends of Cedar Woods, especially those who purchased land near the circles." Collins nodded, frowning. "Consider it done." The drive back to the station felt less weighty, but still lodged with a hardness in my chest. I thought of Barrett's confession and how easy it had been for him to entrust himself to the ritual, to believe he had to feed the earth with innocence. It reminded me that fanaticism can bloom in any grave, any faltering heart. I parked and headed straight to the briefing room, where Forbes and the sergeant waited. They listened as I recapped Barrett's underground lair, named each child, and presented evidence from Henshaw's confession. By the time I finished, the room was silent, each officer's face taut with gravity. "For the moment," I concluded, "our job is to identify and apprehend any remaining participants. The network is extensive. Friends of Cedar Woods, landholders, those with ties to the Whitaker lineage. We must break them completely, and we must organize a day of remembrance for the families whose children still lie nameless in the soil." My voice cracked with the weight of that promise. Forbes placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll do it, Holloway." I breathed out a shaky nod. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the original clearing, where the oak still stood sentinel over so many broken prayers. The sun was high now, casting dappled light through the foliage. I knelt by the spot where Maggie had rested, ground now cleared of evidence markers, awaiting reburial. Ah, I pressed my palm to the flattened earth, feeling the cold thrum beneath. I'm sorry I took so long to find you, I whispered. You will be remembered now. I sprinkled fresh soil, burying a small ceramic daisy charm, her favorite I'd read. I rose, feeling something shift within me. The forest seemed quieter, as though listening. I swept my gaze across the circle of stones and the patch of moss where children had fallen one by one. This place, once alive with darkness, felt stripped, exposed to the glare of truth, and in that exposure maybe the forest would finally release its hunger. But as I turned to leave, I caught a flicker of white at the tree line, something moving, too quick to be a bird. I paused, heartbeat accelerating, shining my flashlight toward the motion. The outline of a small figure darted between trees, too small to be a man, and far too swift. I shone the light there, but nothing remained. Still, I knew what I had seen. A child's silhouette, gliding behind the pines, watching from the periphery. I swallowed, gulping down a surge of dread. Maybe it was Maggie or one of the others, lingering until redemption came. Or maybe it was the hunger, something left behind that refused to relinquish its hold. I took a step back, hands trembling, and exhaled into the chill air. I whispered, I freed you, though I wasn't sure if the whisper was for the forest, for the lost children, or for myself. As I walked away, I felt the hollow ache return, softer now, but persistent, like a promise that vigilance must never cease. Because, promise or not, the forest might release this cycle, or it might have woven something even deeper. That night I lay awake at home, staring at the ceiling as images drifted across my mind. Maggie's gentle face, Barrett's hollow confession, Henshaw's reckless terror. My wife slept beside me, but I felt a vast distance between us, as though the forest had planted a seed of unease deep inside. I reached to turn off the lamp, but my hand hovered, shaking. The darkness in my room felt different now, less a refuge, more a stage for shadow. I rolled onto my side, staring out the window at the towering pines edging our yard. My breath caught as I saw a flicker of white between branches, just as I had in the clearing. A small figure, head thrown back, silent gaze fixed on my window. My blood ran cold. I bolted upright, but when I peered through the glass, nothing remained but swaying shadows and the night's hush. I exhaled in ragged relief, convinced I'd blinded myself with fear. But then, a soft scratch at the pane, faint, like fingernails tracing cold glass. I froze, heart twisting. My wife stirred, murmured something in her sleep. I watched, breath shallow as the scratch repeated, long stroke from left to right, ending in a hollow circle. I turned on the lamp, blazing light into the room, but the scratches vanished, leaving the window smooth and unmarked. I pressed my palm against it. Cool, but no residue, no smear, nothing. I shook my head, mind reeling. Maybe it was a trick of light, a dream. But I felt the forest's breath on my back, its hunger stirring in the hush. I whispered to the empty room, I will remember you. And as I lay there, eyes wide, heartbeat echoing in my skull, I realized that even with the arrests, the bones reburied, and every ritual site exposed, the forest still held secrets I could not name. And in that unknowable space a promise was forged, that the pines would wait, patient, for the day when I, Detective Marcus Holloway, betrayed my pledge or faltered in shadow. Because even as dawn approached, I understood that darkness never truly dies. It only hides until it can breathe again. And that thought, more than any horror I had faced, chilled me to the core.